Silence. During the late emperor's reign, he was tragically ensnared by the claws of narcotics. Therefore, drugs are an unforgivable crime. According to Article 47, Paragraph 1 of Imperial Law, anyone who illegally uses or distributes narcotics shall be executed immediately. The judge's voice was cold and resolute as he sentenced the criminal to death by beheading. The guillotine stood in the center of the square, surrounded by a dense crowd of onlookers. The prisoner being escorted forward was deathly pale. Trembling, he begged, "Wait, please, just this once." The rope was yanked sharply. The heavy blade rushed down the track. In an instant, blood splattered across the frame and the crowd nearby. A frenzied cheer erupted. Adeline stood amid the noisy crowd, staring at the scene before her in horror. Her heart pounded violently, the dull thud sounding as if it might break through her chest. The atmosphere in the square was suffocatingly oppressive. Quiet murmurs rose from the spectators. What a grim atmosphere. Still, catching the criminal before Duke Cesare returned was considered a blessing. Keeping her head lowered, Adeline pushed her way through the noisy crowd with difficulty. The surrounding whispers kept drilling into her ears. If it were that cold-blooded Duke, the criminal's whole family would probably be sent to the guillotine too. Didn't he cut off King Carlpin's head with a single strike during the war? Usually, rulers are kept alive for negotiations. But that man is practically insane. In any case, the war was already over. The day Duke Cesare would return to the capital was close at hand. The basket on Adeline's back, filled with herbs, tipped over, and bright green leaves scattered across the ground. Startled, Adeline crouched down and shakily gathered the herbs with both hands. The surrounding people stopped and looked at the flustered woman in confusion. A whisper rose from the crowd. "Isn't that the famous pharmacist from the next street over?" "Pharmacist?" A man called out enthusiastically from behind her, waving his arm. "My arm doesn't hurt at all anymore. You're incredible. The medicine you gave me last time was like a miracle cure." Another woman, carrying a child, hurried over and cried gratefully, "Miss Pharmacist, my child's fever is completely gone now." Grateful voices rose one after another. "It's all thanks to you. Without you, we wouldn't know what to do. It's fine, really. As long as I can help, everything will get better." As Adeline looked at the herbs in her basket, the cold blade of the guillotine and the blood-soaked scaffold flashed through her mind again. Even if she used that method, the outcome was easy to foresee. "I can do this." She squeezed her eyes shut, her breathing turning quick and uneven. All of her efforts had been for Duke Cesare. Gasping for breath, she tried to calm her racing heart. She had to finish the research before she was discovered. Adeline pushed open the heavy door. The wooden door gave a harsh creak. Carrying her things, she crossed the empty hall, her footsteps echoing through the silent corridor. She stopped and looked around uneasily. It's too quiet here. Hasn't it ever been this empty before? Did everyone go to see the execution? Something feels off. She suddenly grabbed the cold metal doorknob and twisted hard. The door did not budge. It was tightly locked. Adeline let out a long breath, and her tense shoulders finally relaxed. Looks like I was overthinking it. It really was locked properly. She opened the door and entered the room. A strange scent lingered inside. Slowly, Adeline turned her head, and her clear green eyes narrowed sharply. Someone was sitting in the shadows by the window. Cesare was quietly watching her. Wearing black leather gloves, he idly toyed with a bright red flower at his fingertips. Adeline froze in shock. "Your Grace." Cesare sat in the shadow by the window, his deep crimson eyes carrying a severe, oppressive presence. Adeline Elrod clutched the basket tightly and asked in a trembling voice, "Why, Your Grace, why are you here? And no, when did you return?" Cesare tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth curving in amused interest. "Is that all you have to say to me?" Adeline snapped back to herself and hurriedly bowed deeply. "See, congratulations on your triumphant return. I should have come to greet you, but I thought you would be busy preparing for the celebration." Cesare rose to his feet, his boots making dull sounds against the floorboards as he approached her step by step. "I heard that while I was away, you did something rather adorable." Adeline trembled all over and asked cautiously, "What do you mean?" "I don't understand." "Drugs." Adeline's face turned white in an instant. Cesare looked down at her, his gaze cold and completely devoid of warmth. "You've been manufacturing opium all this time, haven't you?" Adeline opened her mouth, trying to explain. "Your Grace, Cesare cut her off. You should know very well that excuses like researching painkillers won't work on me. You know the manufacture or distribution of narcotics is a capital crime in this empire. And you also know I have the authority to carry out the death sentence immediately. The herbs in Adeline's hands scattered across the floor. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees in front of Cesare. Your Grace, Cesare looked down at her from above, his crimson eyes utterly cold. I only wanted to help you. For the wounded soldiers. This could really be useful. I swear it. I know drugs are illegal, but Cesare suddenly reached out and lightly lifted her chin. Adeline. He leaned in slightly, his voice turning lower and gentler. I'm not trying to frighten you. Listen, Adeline. As it happens, I am in need of a duchess. His black-gloved fingers hooked lightly around Adeline's round glasses. So, Adeline, shall we get married? Adeline froze completely. She wondered if she had misheard. What did I just hear? Lord Cesare? Was he the sort of man who made jokes like that? And if it wasn't a joke, then why? She opened her mouth, but no complete words came out. His deep crimson eyes reflected her flustered figure. At last, Adeline stammered. I don't want to marry you, Your Grace. Silence fell over the study. Cesare slowly removed his glasses and let out a meaningful hum. That truly wounds my pride. Are you saying that rather than marry me, you'd prefer to go to the guillotine and have your head cut off? Adeline waved her hands in panic. And no, that's not what I meant. Cesare stroked her hair and asked, then why don't you want to marry me? In the end, your fate will be one of two things. Either you lose your life, or you're sold off to some pig of a man. Adeline stared at him. A pig? Cesare let out a faint snort. I'm asking why you don't want to marry me. Adeline lowered her head to avoid his gaze. Because your Grace couldn't possibly truly like me. It must be because of my mother. After all, she was once your wet nurse. Her voice grew smaller and smaller. You probably still think of me as a child. And you must need an heir. That means you'd have to do that kind of thing with me. But you can't, can you? Cesare did not answer. He only gazed at her in silence. Cesare suddenly moved closer. Their breaths were nearly touching. Without warning, Cesare gripped the back of Adeline's head and kissed her. Adeline's eyes flew wide in shock, her whole body freezing in place. At last, Cesare slowly pulled back and looked down at the girl in his arms, her face flushed red, her eyes hazy. Are you satisfied now? A carriage rolled down the street. Seated inside, Rotan said, His Grace ordered us to escort you directly to his residence. You have no objection to that, I assume? Adeline sat across from him, her fingers lightly touching her lips. Sir Rotan. Adeline hesitated, then said, His Grace. Propose to me. Rotan answered calmly, I know. Adeline stared blankly at him. That's it? Aren't you surprised at all? Rotan replied, Why would I be surprised? Miss Adeline, you were on the verge of execution. Accept him. The Empire's crackdown on prohibited drugs grows harsher by the day. He handed her a small pouch of brightly colored candies. His Grace is simply doing everything in his power to preserve your life. Since he happens to need a duchess, he chose the most efficient method. Adeline looked down at the candy in her palm. Efficient. That was true, because my mother had once been Duke Cesari's wet nurse. My whole family had always been considered part of the Duke's faction. If I were executed over prohibited drugs, it would be no different from tarnishing His Grace's reputation. But even so, if this was only a proposal based on efficiency, then it meant it didn't necessarily have to be me. It could have been anyone. A marriage without affection. Rotan looked at the silent Adeline and said, No matter what, even if you dislike it now, there's nothing you can do. You should never have touched those drugs in the first place. Adeline lowered her eyes. I only wanted to help His Grace. All my life, I've only ever received help from him. Powerful painkillers are indispensable in war. Adeline suddenly looked up at Rotan in surprise. But how did you know about this? Rotan turned his head and met her gaze. You secretly bought up all the opium and thought His Grace wouldn't notice. That's the part that surprises me most. At first, I even thought you had become addicted yourself, or that someone had thoroughly deceived you. Adeline hurriedly protested, I haven't gone that far. Rotan withdrew his gaze and said evenly, In any case, everything His Grace has done has been for your sake, Miss Adeline. Though I understand this is a heavy burden for you. After a long while, she finally said softly, I need time to think it over properly. Anxiously, Adeline added, just thinking about my father. He'll definitely cause trouble for His Grace. You know what kind of man he is. Rotan fell silent. Adeline cautiously called, "Sir Rotan?" He snapped back to himself. "Ah, yes." Looking at her again, his tone softened a little. "More importantly, everyone wants to see you, Miss Adeline. When they heard I was coming to see you today, they all insisted I pass along their greetings." The tension instantly left Adeline's face. "Really? Is everyone doing well?" Sir Sinan, Sir Michel, and Sir Diego. As she spoke excitedly, a piece of candy slipped from her fingers. Adeline hurriedly lowered her head to pick it up, unwrapping another piece of candy in the process. Watching Adeline fumble, the savage scar on Rotan's face even seemed to soften with his faint smile. "Of course, that rascal Diego even brought you a rabbit doll as a gift when he came back." The wall clock ticked heavily. Time passed in the silence. Cesare stood by the window, flipping through a thick stack of documents. Adeline's research notes were scattered across the desk, filled with densely written chemical formulas and little butterfly drawings. He looked down at the pages, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "For now, this will do. Everything is proceeding according to plan. All of this is for that one purpose." 10 years earlier, Adeline ran through the courtyard. "Mother, where are you? Mother!" She stopped and looked around, tears filling her eyes. A low voice came from above. "You must be Lily, right? The nursemaid's daughter?" Adeline looked up, tears rolling down her cheeks. Cesare looked down at her and asked, "Is that a nickname or your real name?" Sniffling, Adeline answered, "And no, that's not my name. That's just what my mother calls me." Then she finally burst into tears and threw herself into Cesari's arms, clutching tightly at his clothes. Choking back sobs, Adeline said, "My mother. I lost her. She told me to stay where I was, but I got distracted by a strange flower." In a low voice, he replied, "I understand. Everyone is desperately looking for you." Adeline stopped crying and looked up at him blankly, tears still clinging to the corners of her eyes. Cesari's cloak billowed in the wind. He reached out, lifted Adeline into his arms, and said, "Come with me." Adeline lay slumped over the table, her breathing heavy and uneven. "Just because I thought he was an adult, I ran straight into his arms like that, even though at the time he was only a young prince. I should have gone to find Sir Rotan instead." Her mother cupped young Adeline's face and sternly instructed her, "Listen carefully, Adeline. No matter what happens, you must never stain His Highness's honor. Our Elrod family must serve him for life. Never forget that." Adeline thought, "Yes, I must never forget. He was the flourishing Duke of Karl and the supreme commander of the Trayvon Empire." After the brutal struggle for the throne, Cesare personally placed his only younger half-brother upon it. He was a noble aristocrat, and more than that, a truly great being. Someone as shabby as me is going to become his duchess. Slumped over the table, Adeline weakly tugged at her hair. If Mother were still alive, she never would have let something like this happen. In a wine glass, Adeline's blurred reflection wavered. Someone like me becoming his duchess would only stain Lord Cesari's good name. Adeline swayed as she stood up. "There has to be a way. I have to find a path that lets me escape execution and avoid this marriage as well." Adeline walked to the window and looked out at the dim world beyond. "It's already this late. HM, come to think of it, he still hasn't come back." 1 week later, night cloaked the streets. Laundry hanging on lines swayed in the wind, and flirtatious laughter from women drifted out from in front of a tavern. "My, what a cute young gentleman. Want to play with your big sisters?" Wearing loose men's clothing and a flat cap, Adeline kept her head down and hurried along the street. If he hasn't come back for a whole week, then he's definitely off gambling somewhere again. And the money he used most likely was... The front door burst open with a loud crash. "Adeline, the Duke is really coming back. I heard even the application to build a triumphal arch has been approved. This is a huge opportunity." Her father shouted with feverish excitement. "Finally, I can make a fortune." As he spoke, he roughly snatched up the cloth bag from the table. "I'm heading out." Without another glance, the man rushed toward the door. Standing by the table, Adeline called after his back, "Father, where are you going?" Back then, he must have gone to see the Duke. If Father really got gambling money from his grace, then he must have paid some kind of price for it. I have to get back whatever money is left. At the very least, I have to return that money to his grace. I can't cause him any more trouble. She hurried through the empty street, her shoes clicking sharply against the stone pavement. 2 ill-intentioned men hid in the shadows, watching Adeline's retreating figure. One of them quietly followed her. Suddenly, a hand shot out from behind and seized her hat. Adeline cried out, as the hat was yanked off. Her long hair spilled down at once. The man gave her a lewd grin and chuckled. Trembling, Adeline asked, why are you doing this? Who are you? The man looked her over and said, I thought the way you walked looked suspicious. So you're a girl after all. The two thugs closed in on her with ill intent. Look at that gloomy face and that messy fringe. How did you even figure out she was a girl? Take off those glasses. We'll show you a good time. Terrified, Adeline staggered backward. One of the thugs suddenly grabbed her wrist. Don't run. Get over here. Adeline struggled desperately, losing her balance as she fell backward. No, let go. I'll fall. Just as she was about to hit the ground, a pair of hands firmly caught her by the back. Breathing hard in fright, Adeline looked up at the person who had saved her. A cold voice rang out in the alley. So this is where that stench is coming from. Has all the trash gathered in one place? The red-haired man lowered his head slightly, the corners of his mouth curling into a wild, dangerous smile. The men opposite him went pale with fear and unconsciously stepped back. Men who only know how to trouble women must have far too much free time. Perfect timing. Today, I'll pound some sense into those rotten heads of yours. Standing behind Diego, Adeline hurriedly interrupted, please don't make a scene. Diego's eyes went wide. Miss Adeline, he shouted. The men who had been harassing her screamed, run, and fled the scene in a panic. Back indoors, Diego still looked shaken. Throwing his arms wide, he said emotionally, good heavens, Miss Adeline, what on earth happened? Out alone in a place like this at this hour? It's far too dangerous. Please calm your breathing first. No matter what, I'll hunt those bastards down and drag them back. Sitting quietly to one side, Adeline adjusted her glasses and said softly, but Sir Diego. Diego stopped moving and turned to look at her. What is it? Why? Are you here in a place like this? Hastily setting down his beer mug, he forced an awkward smile. Oh, well. And no, Miss Adeline, I really am here on official business. A trace of suspicion entered Adeline's voice. In a place like this? Pressed by her question, Diego broke into a sweat. Yes, exactly in a place like this. No matter how he explained it, it sounded suspicious. Damn it, this is a disaster. Adjusting her glasses, Adeline asked, Sir Diego, what did you just say? Diego nearly lost his soul in fright. Clutching his head, he begged, oh no, please forgive me, Miss Adeline. I was just talking nonsense. Seeing his pathetic state, Adeline couldn't help letting out a small laugh. Diego hung his head gloomily, both hands braced on the table. Adeline's smile faded, and she looked at him seriously. More importantly, Sir Diego, have you seen my father? He hasn't come home for an entire week. I thought he might be somewhere in the alleys around here. Diego listened in silence, something complicated flickering in his eyes. Resting one hand on the table, he answered quietly, First, you should drink something warm, miss. Hot chocolate or hot milk with honey. Adeline lowered her gaze. He was definitely hiding something. Suddenly, she reached out, picked up another cup from the table, and said, This will do. Diego froze and cried out in alarm, And miss, that's beer. Adeline lifted the heavy wooden mug and tipped her head back, swallowing the spicy liquid in large gulps. Sitting nearby, Diego held a pink doll in his arms. Our young lady has really grown up. She can even drink beer now. Adeline slammed the empty mug down on the table with a heavy thud. His Grace, Diego was cowed by the sudden force in her manner and sat up unconsciously straighter. Adeline let out a long breath, the alcohol bringing color to her cheeks. Staring into Diego's eyes, she asked, You know where my father is, don't you? Diego avoided her gaze, looking uncomfortable. Adeline pressed on, I'm not stupid. Are you deliberately hiding it from me? Is there some reason I can't know? Diego stammered, well, that's... At that moment, the sound of steady footsteps approached from behind, breaking the tense standstill between them. Adeline stared at Diego and asked, Why won't you tell me? A deep voice sounded from behind her. Because Diego can't say it. Adeline flinched sharply, feeling warm breath brush against her ear. At some point, Cesare had already bent down behind her, half enclosing her where she sat. Not Diego, Adeline. The person you should be angry at is me. Cesare set down a plate of cookies on the table. Isn't that right? Though there isn't any tea here. Adeline sank into the wide chair, clutching at the fabric of her skirt in agitation. Of all times, he had to see me like this. He must think I look ridiculous. Taking a deep breath, Adeline tried to break the suffocating silence. Your Grace, just now Cesare did not answer at once. He turned his head slightly, his crimson eyes watching her in the dim light. That gaze left Adeline dazed, and she called softly without thinking, Your Grace. Cesare turned toward her, a gentle, an intense smile curving his lips. He picked up a cookie and stuffed it into Adeline's mouth without ceremony. I said eat. Adeline chewed blankly, the cookie still in her mouth. What was that expression on his face just now? It must have been my imagination. Cesare extended a finger and gently brushed the corner of Adeline's lips, wiping away a crumb stuck there. Adeline shrank back at once, her face flushing bright red. I could do it myself. Watching her flustered movements, Cesare let out a quiet laugh. Don't be so tense, Adeline. How could I ever hurt you? Adeline stared at him blankly, Cesare's figure reflected in her eyes. Of course, except when he's kissing me. Adeline abruptly lowered her head, her voice as soft as a whisper. Your Grace, do you really intend to marry me? Cesare lifted a brow, amusement in his tone. Why do you still doubt me? Would you like me to prove it further? Panicking, Adeline looked up. And no, that's not what I mean. Before you went to war, you never treated me like this. Even if things are completely different now. Cesare listened quietly, a meaningful curve tugging at his lips. 7 years is enough time to change anyone. Adeline froze, lifting her head in confusion. 7 years? But the war only lasted 3 years. His gaze made her deeply uncomfortable, and she hunched her shoulders awkwardly. You don't look at me like that. Cesare tilted his head slightly. Like what? Anyway, that's not the point. Is there really no other way besides marriage? Or, at least, please give me a little more time. Last time, I was too flustered to explain properly. Morphus is completely different from existing painkillers. It has a very wide range of uses. If we can develop it further, it definitely can. Cesare suddenly pressed his forehead against hers. Adeline, tell me, when I kissed you, did you hate it? Adeline looked away. How could I possibly hate it? Of course I could never hate Cesare. He watched her quietly, waiting for the answer she couldn't say. It was a kiss from the man I have loved for years. But even so, she still couldn't say it honestly. She wanted to complete her research. She wanted to reject her engagement to Cesare. All of it, in the end, stemmed from the same truth. It all came from her love for him. She didn't want that confession to become a burden, and she didn't dare hope that someone like herself could be allowed to have such feelings. Clutching the hem of her clothes tightly, Adeline lowered her head and whispered, yes. I hated that kiss. Cesare looked at her in silence, then reached out and cupped her cheek. I told you, don't close your eyes when you lie, Adeline. Adeline looked flustered. Avoiding his eyes, she protested, that's not a lie. It was just my first time experiencing something like that, so I didn't know what to do. Cesare looked at her awkward expression, the corner of his mouth lifting into a faint smile. In that case, we should keep trying until you get used to it. Adeline's eyes flew wide. She covered her mouth with both hands and cried, and no, we can't do that. I just ate cookies and I drank alcohol too. So right now, Cesare did not stop. He pressed a hand to Adeline's shoulder and kissed the side of her neck. Her voice vanished between her lips, reduced to only a tiny gasp. Adeline, come to the palace tomorrow. Attend a victory banquet. Celebrate for me. He lifted Adeline's hand and pressed a kiss to her fingertips, then looked up, his crimson eyes fixed on her. You can do that, can't you? Cesare stood and instructed the guard outside the door, escort the lady home safely. The guard answered respectfully, yes, your grace. In the deepening night, the carriage rolled slowly down the street. Standing by the roadside, Diego watched it depart and muttered a curse. Damn it. Of all times, he had to show up during my shift. Rotan was supposed to be the one to run into her. Why did it have to be me? He stared in the direction the carriage vanished and fell into thought. Oh, whatever. The heavy wooden door scraped open with a harsh sound as he stepped into the dim room. Candlelight flickered in the shadows. Your Grace, that young lady just now. A panicked cry sounded from behind him. Sir Diego, a man with blood all over his face, collapsed to the floor. Spare me. Adeline. Adeline is looking for me. Why? Why bring me to a terrifying place like this? Diego. Cesare lifted a black-gloved hand and lightly wiped his forehead. Don't let Adeline drink alcohol. From now on, hide every bottle. Diego lowered his head. Understood, your grace. Cesare suddenly seized the fallen man by the hair and yanked his head violently backward. The man screamed in agony. Leaning close to his ear, Cesare asked in a low voice, well then, Baron, is there anything else you can sell? The man groaned in pain. Please spare me. I never meant to sell Adeline. standing a short distance away. Diego watched the scene in silence. Good heavens, we haven't even truly started yet. Watching Cesare, he thought, even if he looks like he's in a good mood, he's really changed, hasn't he? In Cesari's hand was a pair of cold iron tongs. He brought them near the man's face, a cruel smile curving his lips. 6 months earlier, the palace of the kingdom of Caelbon was wreathed in smoke. Severed limbs and broken remnants littered the scorched path of war. The king of Caelbon knelt amid the ruins. I know you, your highness. With a sword in hand, Cesare led a group of officers through the corridors strewn with corpses. From this point on, the kingdom of Caelbon falls under the empire's rule. His black-gloved hand covered his mouth and nose as Cesare murmured, "Hasn't it already been 7 years? So you finally returned." Wait. Beneath the sword's edge, the king trembled and made one last desperate plea. "No matter what you want." The sword flashed down. Blood splashed before the broken throne. The golden crown rolled across the floor with a dull clang, then lay still in a pool of blood. Cesare withdrew his sword. Beads of blood slid from the blade's tip and dripped onto the cold stone floor. "Your Grace, even if you had spared his life, you could have dealt with him later once his value had been measured. Perhaps, but I executed him immediately anyway." Cesare stopped walking and said in a calm voice, "I want to marry Adeline." Diego froze, shock filling his face. "But that would burden her." Cesare continued walking. "There is no other choice. It is better than letting her lose her head on the guillotine." Diego shouted in disbelief. "What? Who would dare touch that lady's neck?" More importantly, crows circled beneath the blood-red setting sun, crying harshly. "I will never let that happen again." Cesare tipped his head back slightly. The blood splattered across his face had not yet dried, but a cold, resolute smile curved his lips. The sound echoed over the city. Adeline struggled through the packed crowd. "Please wait. Excuse me. I can't see ahead." Cheers came in crashing waves. Pushed and jostled, Adeline lifted her head breathlessly. Red flags fluttered across the square, and the surrounding people shouted wildly. The ceremonial drums beat out a steady, marching rhythm. Then bright trumpets rang out, announcing the beginning of the grand procession. In the crowd, Adeline stared with parted lips. The sound of hoofbeats drew nearer, crisp against the pavement. Long live the Trayvon Empire. Long live Duke Carl. The thunderous cheers seemed enough to overturn the sky. Cesare rode on horseback, his scarlet cloak snapping in the wind. Adeline stopped behind the pressing crowd. Through the shifting heads in front of her, she stared ahead, unconsciously clutching the fabric over her chest. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. His Grace. Cesare leaned down from the saddle and accepted a white flower from a young girl by the roadside. Then he suddenly stopped. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. "HM, what's happening?" A startled cry rose from the front. His Grace the Duke got off his horse. Standing amid the dim, human silhouettes, Adeline looked utterly at a loss. The sound of orderly footsteps echoed through the street. "Everyone assemble. Salute His Grace the Duke." Amid the noisy commands, Adeline turned her head and stared ahead in complete disbelief. Cesare stood still under everyone's gaze, the white flower in his hand. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He held the flower out to Adeline, his tone carrying an unquestionable gentleness. "All of this is yours." Adeline stood frozen. The crowd around them erupted into loud discussion. What's going on? Was a guard hidden in the crowd? Was that to prevent an accident? As expected of His Grace the Duke, so thoughtful, truly worthy of the noble Duke Carl. Yet voices of doubt also grew in the shadows. Who is that woman? Just who is she to dare hand a lily to Duke Carl herself? Adeline felt the stares pouring onto her from all directions. Fine sweat broke out at her temples. On a high balcony, Onella leaned against the railing. Raising an elegant lorgnette, she quietly watched everything taking place on the street below. The setting sun dyed the entire residence orange red. A carriage stopped before the entrance, and servants busied themselves unloading items. His Grace the Duke has sent dresses and jewelry. Inside the residence, maids ran about anxiously, exclaiming in alarm. There isn't much time left before the victory banquet. We must hurry and get you ready. What should I work on first?" Curled up in one corner of a large sofa, Adeline hugged her knees, looking small and helpless. A maid came close and asked, "Shall I begin with your hair?" And Adeline stared at the blooming lily in the vase. Why did he do that? He knew perfectly well that doing such a thing would throw the entire royal capital into chaos. His Highness the Prince will surely become the Empire's hope. Being able to serve as his wet nurse makes me very proud. You must support His Highness well too, Lily. So, a hand holding out a pair of glasses appeared before her. It would be better to hide those embarrassing eyes. You understand what Mother said, don't you, Adeline? Barefoot on the soft carpet, she lowered her eyes and said quietly to the maid beside her, I don't need any adornments. The maid looked startled and replied hesitantly, but could you at least help me put on the dress? The banquet hall blazed with light. Guests clustered together in small groups, and hushed voices spread beneath the magnificent chandeliers. I heard that during today's parade, His Grace the Duke personally gave a flower to a lady. Rumors raced through the hall as guests, wine glasses in hand, spoke in low tones. I didn't see it myself, but they say the lady possesses a beauty rarely seen in this world. Some even say she's the daughter of some great noble house. Does that mean the position of Duchess has already been decided? Several noble women gathered together, fanning themselves. Ah, then she must be absolutely enchanting. Adeline stood at the entrance to the hall, head lowered, both hands gripping her shawl tightly. Laughter from the men nearby rose now and then. Adeline took a deep breath, wavering with uncertainty. Maybe I really shouldn't have come here after all. But even so, His Grace personally asked me to come. Since I've already come this far, I can't back out now. I'll just greet him and leave immediately. Quietly making her plan, Adeline kept her head down and tried to find a path through the crowded banquet hall. Instead, she accidentally bumped into a lady standing ahead of her. I'm sorry, Adeline apologized quickly, but when she looked up, she froze on the spot. Onella turned around, elegantly waving her fan. She looked at Adeline, a trace of amusement passing through her eyes. Good heavens, Onella smiled faintly. You're the daughter of Baron Elrod's family, aren't you? Adeline's heart jolted. This person is Miss Pharmacist. Have you heard? The news of His Majesty's engagement? Adeline lowered her head and arranged the medicine bottles. Yes. Where did I hear it again? I think it was from the house of Pavarini. The customer in the pharmacy laughed heartily. As expected of the well-known apothecary, news travels fast here. Adjusting her glasses, Adeline gave an awkward smile. I only saw it in today's newspaper. The customer leaned in and lowered her voice. Then perhaps you've heard that rumor too. They say the young lady's original intended fiancé wasn't His Majesty, but the Grand Duke of Elzid instead. Looking at the woman before her, Adeline thought that person, Miss Pavarini. Adeline looked slightly uneasy as she greeted her softly. Hello. Several noble women walked in quickly, and one exclaimed, Good heavens, Miss Onella. My word, you look as beautiful as ever today. And that dress is absolutely charming. Another chimed in, Honestly, the title Lily of the Trayvon Empire suits you perfectly. Standing nearby, Adeline looked at Onella, surrounded by the others. A lily. Somehow that nickname suited her far better than it ever suited me. One noblewoman looked at Adeline in confusion. But who is this young lady? I don't think I've ever seen her before. Onella looked at Adeline and said, she is the lady who received a flower from His Grace the Duke during today's parade. Adeline flinched sharply. What? Her eyes widened in disbelief as she froze in place. The noble women around them began whispering among themselves. Goodness, compared to the rumors calling her a breathtaking beauty, doesn't she look rather plain? Another woman waved her fan and replied quietly, Rumors are always exaggerated, aren't they? So the rumor about the Duke's fiancé was just nonsense after all. With a crisp snap, Onella opened her fan. How terribly rude of you. His Grace the Duke is not the kind of man who ignores those in need. Miss Adeline is merely one of the many people he has supported. Spreading such gossip will only burden the generous and compassionate heart of His Grace the Duke. You should apologize to Miss Adeline as well. Adeline stared blankly at Onella. What is going on? The noble women looked embarrassed and lowered their heads one after another. We're sorry. We didn't know. So she was only receiving support. Somehow it felt. The sound of steady footsteps approached and stopped behind Adeline. Miss Adeline. Startled, Adeline turned around to see Rotan. Walking up to her, he said, So this is where you were. I've been looking for you. Everyone is waiting for you, Miss Adeline. Adeline answered in surprise. Sir Rotan. Adeline gave a slight curtsy. It is an honor to see you. Miss, I hope we meet again next time. Rotan led Adeline away, leaving only Onella and the noble women standing there. That man, Isn't he His Grace the Grand Duke's knight? Then why would the Grand Duke's knight personally go to fetch that woman? If it were only about providing support, wouldn't sending a servant have been enough? Why go in person? This level of consideration. If it's only being called sponsorship, it feels a bit. Onila stood there in silence, watching the direction in which the two of them had left. Thank you for coming, Miss Irene. His Grace the Grand Duke will surely be very pleased. Was your journey here comfortable? May I see your dance card? As Rotan took Irene's dance card, he said, I should have escorted you personally, but something came up at the last minute. Irene quickly bowed her head and replied, It's all right. His Grace arranged everything perfectly. My trip here was very comfortable. He even sent people to help me dress and prepare, but I felt that was too much, so I sent them all back. Looking at the dance card in her hand, Irene thought, if I had known it would turn out like this, I should have accepted their help. I feel like I stand out even more now. Suddenly, Diego popped out from behind Rotan and shouted, Oh, not at all, my lady. If you were dressed even more perfectly, it would leave people unable to breathe. Startled, Irene cried out, Sir Diego? At that point, every man in the capital would be circling around you. Irene glanced around a little anxiously, then asked, Where are Sir Michel and Sir Sinon? I thought I would see them today. Diego replied, Our Zenon and Michel will arrive later. They may not make it in time at all. Irene lowered her head in disappointment. I really wanted to see them both. What a pity. Diego smiled and comforted her. Don't say that. We'll be having tea together soon enough. Oh, right, I bought a rabbit doll. It's absolutely wonderful. It looks exactly like you, my lady. Irene gave a helpless smile. I'm already an adult, but thank you for thinking of me, Sir Diego. Not far away, two young officers looked over with obvious delight. One of them exclaimed, No way. It's really Miss Irene. The other also shouted excitedly, What? Really? The young officers crowded around her, exclaiming one after another. My goodness, when did you get this grown up? How many years has it been? One of them asked eagerly, Do you remember me? When you were 12, another squeezed his way forward and shouted, And me, when you were 15. Rotan led Irene onward. Your dance card is already full. Irene replied a little helplessly, Yes. Lowering her head, her gaze fell on the card, and a trace of doubt rose in her heart. Why is only the very first line still blank? Rotan stopped walking and softly called out, Miss Irene, we've arrived at the greenhouse. Recently, many new plants have been brought in from the east. Some of them may be useful for your research. Irene responded in delight, Wow, really? Rotan nodded. Yes, please look around as much as you like. Irene quickly headed toward the greenhouse, then stopped and turned back to ask, Then what about you, Lord Rotan? Rotan stopped at the doorway and replied, I must return to the ballroom. Please make yourself at home. I hope you enjoy yourself. There shouldn't be any trouble on your way back. Irene walked alone through the greenhouse, her footsteps echoing in the spacious silence. The greenhouse has changed a lot. She looked at the lush plants around her, and her thoughts slowly drifted away. When I was little, thanks to His Grace, I spent almost every day here. It was the only place where I could forget all my troubles. Even after all this time, it still has a way of making you feel calm, doesn't it? Irene suddenly widened her eyes and looked toward the source of the voice. Cesare stood in the depths of the greenhouse. Welcome, Irene. Looking at her with the faintest hint of a smile on his lips, he said, I've been waiting for you. Irene's heart jolted. Your Grace, why is he here? A startled sound escaped her lips. Irene immediately composed herself, lifted her skirt, and curtsied. Grand Duke Cesare Karl Erzit, congratulations on your promotion. Cesare looked at the nervous woman before him. A deep smile curved at the corner of his mouth. Thank you, Miss Elrod. Irene looked flustered. Oh, did I make a mistake? I'm still not familiar with formal etiquette. Cesare stopped and replied, No. You did very well. He reached out and took the dance card from Irene's hand. More importantly, Irene, you still owe me a dance. Irene trembled sharply, her heartbeat quickening of its own accord. She stared at the man in front of her. Cesare lowered his head, fully focused as he wrote on the card. The pen scratched softly across the paper. Then he handed the card back to Irene. Come, Irene. She took the card, and her gaze fell on the very top line. It was the place reserved for the first dance. In surprise, she murmured softly, Sensing her reaction, Cesare asked with concern, Irene, what is it? A little flustered, Irene explained, I just didn't expect your Grace to invite me to dance. I'm not very good at it, and I haven't even properly taken dance lessons. Cesare cut off her worries. Irene, have you forgotten? Who was it that taught you your very first steps? Irene's thoughts were instantly pulled back into the past. Yes, that's right. Those were the days when, over and over, she stepped on his feet just to make sure it wasn't all a dream. He held her hand and patiently guided her clumsy steps. Irene lifted her face with a bright smile, while Cesare gazed at her gently, a faint smile on his lips. He must have been very busy that day, too, and yet for me. A sharp sound of something shattering suddenly rang out. Irene, I can hardly believe you wasted the Grand Duke's time over something as trivial as dance lessons. Irene sat collapsed on the cold floor, trembling uncontrollably. How dare you? Don't you understand your place yet? Clutching the hem of her skirt tightly, Irene spoke in a thin voice. Mother, I'm sorry. I was wrong, Mother. Cesare lifted her chin with one hand. What are you thinking about, Irene? Irene came back to herself with a short gasp. She hurriedly avoided his gaze. Shouldn't you be going? Everyone in the ballroom is waiting for you, Your Grace. Cesare released his hand and answered calmly. I think I can spare a little time to look at these plants. I heard they recently brought in a flowering tree from the east. I'm curious about it. You haven't seen it in a long time either, have you? Let's go take a look together. Irene followed behind him. A lie. He doesn't care about plants at all. With her head lowered, Irene said softly, Thank you, Your Grace. Cesare strolled along the corridor under the moonlight. For what? For the lily earlier and this dress. Even though you put so much thought into it, I still couldn't wear it as properly as I should have. I am Tradisore. He stopped walking, and her voice grew softer and softer. I had thought I was only coming to pay my respects. I never imagined it would end in dancing. Irene let out a sound of amazement and hurried toward a plant ahead of them. This is a camellia tree. I've only read about it in books. This is my first time seeing the real thing. Its petals can be used medicinally to stop bleeding. I've always wanted to see one with my own eyes. Look at these leaves. They're so unusual. Did you know? When camellias fall, their petals don't scatter one by one. The whole bloom drops at once, just like a severed head falling to the ground. So, ironically, even though it can stop bleeding, in the East, it's considered an ill omen, a flower known as the beheaded bloom. Cesare bent slightly. Irene, is this a flower you like? Irene paused, then answered, I wouldn't say I like it exactly. I just think it's fascinating. Cesare reached out, his fingertips brushing the petals. Suddenly, he tightened his grip, and the whole flower was brutally crushed in his palm. Irene cried out, Your Grace, what are you doing? It's only a sapling. It's very fragile. Could you please put it down before we go on talking? Cesare lowered his eyes in silence and loosened his hand. The ruined remains slipped from his fingers. Forgive me, Irene. Irene froze, staring at his unusually somber expression. Cesare turned his face slightly, a trace of self-mockery in his tone. I've been a little strange lately. Irene asked tentatively, Is something troubling you? Cesare replied, Perhaps. Maybe because I almost had to watch you lose your life at the guillotine. Irene fell silent. Even so, he had never been this impulsive before. Even his proposal. Could something have happened to him over the past 3 years? The wedding will be held in a month. Irene gasped. Cesare continued, The sooner the better, but we need at least a little time for the most basic preparations. Your Grace, about that matter. There must be some other way, mustn't there? You've already shown me more kindness than I deserve, and marriage shouldn't be the only way to escape execution. Cesare looked at her in silence, a dark emotion flickering in his eyes. Irene, before she could react, Cesare suddenly reached out, clasped the back of her head, and pulled her sharply toward him. Startled, she stammered, Your Grace. He lowered his head close to Irene's ear, a meaningful smile curling on his lips. Just close your eyes. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Michel hurried toward the hall. What about Irene? Don't tell me all the invitations for the dance are already over while I was gone. Diego looked at the disheveled Michel and said, That's right, it's all over. You should have been faster. Huh. Grinding his teeth, Michel cursed under his breath. Damn those bastards. Then, sobering, he asked, What about Rotan's side? Michel shook his head. Not yet. I'm afraid it won't be finished today. As soon as he finished speaking, the doors to the hall were thrown open. Michel's eyes widened. What is that? Blood-stained leather shoes stepped onto the red carpet with dull, heavy footfalls. The once lively ball instantly fell into dead silence. The guests all stopped what they were doing and looked in terror toward the entrance, where that elongated shadow appeared. Cesare entered the hall, trailing blood. I understand this ball is meant to celebrate my victory, but an assassination attempt? The guests recoiled in fear. Uneasy commotion erupted among the crowd. Cesare stood in the center of the hall, his blood-covered hand resting casually on Irene's shoulder. The same old method as always, truly lacking in sincerity. I now fully understand everyone's intentions. Sasari's lips curved into a dangerous smile. So I will return the favor very soon. Please do look forward to it. Sunlight filtered through the lush branches and spilled into the quiet courtyard. Your Highness really likes plants, doesn't he? I told you, didn't I? And did you read that encyclopedia of plants I gave you before? Cesare leaned back in his chair, calmly watching her. Irene continued excitedly. That book was truly fascinating, especially the sections on gymnosperms and angiosperms. She was about to take a sip of tea when Cesare suddenly stretched out a hand and pressed down on the rim of her cup. Irene, he withdrew his hand, his fingertips lightly tapping the table. Drink. The teacup shook violently against the saucer, making a sharp, clattering sound. The servant's face went deathly pale, cold sweat running down his temples. Your Highness, he suddenly dropped to his knees at Cesari's feet, his forehead striking the floor hard. I have committed a mortal offense. Please spare me this once. Cesari's voice was calm in a way that was terrifying. I told you to drink tea, not beg for mercy. Michel suddenly reached out, grabbed the servant by the hair, and forced the scalding tea down his throat. The servant struggled desperately, painful whimpers escaping from his throat. What a pity. A perfectly good teacup was wasted. Irene, it looks like you won't be able to keep drinking tea. Have a biscuit instead. With her head lowered, Irene trembled violently, small sobs escaping her. Your Highness, tears slid down her cheeks. When she raised her head, her eyes were full of fear and grievance. You startled me. Back in her room, Irene seemed completely drained as she collapsed onto the sofa. Curling into herself, she stared blankly ahead. Whether in the past or now, the ones who struck first, the ones who wanted to kill His Highness, were always those people. A blood-splattered, long sword lay across the cold floor. Red stains were sprayed everywhere. Cesare stood in the shadows, holding a dripping blade. Irene's face was pale, and behind her glasses, her eyes were full of horror. It was self-defense, though the methods were undeniably cruel. She shook her head lightly, trying to throw off the bloody images in her mind. To endure all of that, His Highness. How much pain must he be carrying? Irene sat up from the sofa. I never thought about protecting him. My head was full of nothing but fear. Irene opened her jewelry box. Inside lay an exquisite silver pocket watch. Originally, she had meant to give it to him when he returned. Are we really going to get married? She lowered her eyes. I just needed an opportunity to give this gift to him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, followed by a man's voice. Baron Elrod, are you inside? Irene abruptly raised her head, confusion in her eyes. The door was slowly pushed open. Irene walked to the entrance and looked at the unfamiliar man before her. May I ask who you are? My father isn't home right now. The man in the leopard-patterned shawl looked her over and asked, Are you Irene? Elrod? Irene hesitated a little before replying, Yes, I'm Eden. A smile spread across the man's mouth, one that made her distinctly uncomfortable. He suddenly reached out and gripped Irene's shoulder hard, forcing her to raise her head. Staring in her eyes, he said admiringly, just as I thought. Just like the Baron said, your eyes are truly mysterious. Irene struggled and tried to pull away. WH, what are you doing? The man tightened his grip. Baron Elrod promised to sell me something. He even took the deposit. But no matter how long I waited, the goods were never delivered. Irene's heart pounded violently. What exactly did he promise to sell you? Leaning close, the man said in a low voice, the only thing the Baron had left. His daughter, Irene Elrod. He sold you to me. Irene's pupils contracted sharply. Her mind went blank. Holding her shoulders, the man declared word by word, as my bride. Elrod promised to marry his daughter to me. He even accepted the deposit. I prepared everything for the wedding, yet the bride never appeared. Since you didn't know, I'll give you 3 days. After 3 days, don't come back. He threw a document onto the floor. You'd better say your goodbyes to the people around you in advance. Once you leave this country, there will be no reason to return. Irene stood alone in the empty corridor. Why did you refuse? Either your head falls to the ground, or you're sold to some pig of a man. Those are your only 2 choices. Your Grace, you actually knew all of this from the beginning, didn't you? The glow of sunset spilled over the grand residence. Sonio set down his teacup gracefully. So you finally come to see me. Sonio smiled faintly, his tone lightly teasing. I'm hurt, Miss Irene. Irene hurriedly apologized. I'm sorry. I was just too flustered. Sonio waved a hand and replied, I didn't say that to hear your apology. Please, treat me as comfortably as you used to. Irene tightly gripped her skirt with both hands and hesitated before asking, About His Grace the Grand Duke. Sonio seemed to see right through her thoughts. I'm afraid you won't be able to see Lord Cesare today. I'm sorry you made the trip all the way here. No, it's all right. Lord Cesare is always very busy. Looking at the tea trembling in her cup, Irene felt uneasy. Is it because the Grand Duke refused the royal command? All right, please wait a moment. I'll go bring out some cakes I bought recently from a new shop. Irene replied softly. Thank you. Sonio turned and left, his steady footsteps gradually fading down the corridor. Irene rose and walked to the window. The evening breeze stirred the light curtains. I was in such a hurry that I ran here without thinking at all. Lord Cesare. From the beginning, he was never someone I could easily meet. Is he cold toward me now because I kept refusing the marriage proposal? She closed her eyes and sank into deep self-reproach. Even though I understood nothing, I kept stubbornly refusing. To the Grand Duke. I must look very foolish. What will become of me from now on? Will I be sold to a man I don't know, forced into a marriage I don't want, and then leave this land forever, never hearing anything about Lord Cesare again? Irene, a low voice, suddenly broke the silence. Cesare looked at her and asked, "What is it?" Irene lifted her head and said in a trembling voice, "Your Grace. I originally wanted to give you a gift. I'm sorry, it's nothing special. I just wasn't able to give it to you at the banquet." She handed him an elegant wooden box to congratulate you on your promotion. Cesare opened the lid. Inside, a silver pocket watch lay quietly. This is what it was originally supposed to look like. I thought this design suited you best. If it isn't to your liking, no. Cesare cut her off. I like it very much. Holding the pocket watch, he showed a rare, gentle smile. Irene stared at him blankly, but tears spilled from her eyes before she could stop them. Irene hurriedly lowered her head. Wait, I'm sorry. Cesare asked, somewhat puzzled. Why are you apologizing? Sniffling, Irene replied, Be because I'm crying. No, it's just that all of this. Cesare looked at her. Irene, seeing you cry like this, I can't even stay angry. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek. I had planned to be harsher with you. Irene trembled slightly and asked in confusion, why? Why would you be angry? Because they said they were going to sell you. Sell a girl who hasn't even properly appeared in society, yet to some old foreign toad. And all the while, the only thing on your mind was how to avoid marrying me. Isn't that enough to make me angry? Irene lowered her head, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. Cesare was silent for a moment. Irene, do you truly intend to marry that old toad? Irene shook her head hard. Cesare stepped closer. In a low voice, he asked, Then what should I do? Irene bit her lip. I really don't know. Cesare said quietly, How could you not know, Irene? You must marry me. The curtains billowed violently in the wind as Cesare drew Irene into his arms. Do you still hate the idea, even now? Irene's face was flushed red, tears shimmering in her eyes. The question that had troubled her all day hovered now at the edge of her lips. Since you already knew everything, why didn't you tell me? But this time, too, she had to search for the answer alone. The answer he had given was already carved in stone, never to change. She felt suffocated, as though her whole being were trapped in a fate she could not escape. If the threads binding me are the only light that can save me, then I will. Irene raised her head, tears shining in her eyes along with a firmness she had never shown before. I am willing to marry you, Your Grace. Irene lowered her head again, sounding a little uneasy. But could you please reopen the laboratory? If things go on like this, I'll only become a troublesome Grand Duchess to you. She looked up again, pleading in her eyes. If you let me finish this research, I promise that from now on, I will never conduct any dangerous experiments again. Cesare did not answer. Instead, he suddenly bent down, drew close, and steadied Irene's face. Irene's eyes flew wide open, her cheeks instantly flushing a deep crimson. Why, Your Grace? Please wait. Cesare suddenly pulled Irene into his arms and kissed her deeply. His hand locked tightly against her back, drawing her whole body toward him. Irene let out a startled cry, her body stiffening involuntarily. Only after a long while did Cesare pull back a little. Once we're married, I will reopen the laboratory. Night fell, and moonlight washed over the quiet street. Irene spoke somewhat hurriedly. Actually, I could have gone to see my father by myself. I've taken up more of your time again. Cesare turned his head to look at her, his tone calm and matter of fact. What are you saying? From now on, Irene, wherever you go, you must go with your husband. Irene's fingers curled slightly. You aren't my husband yet. Besides, you really didn't have to come out dressed like this. Here, if you wear glasses. You'll only attract more attention instead. Cesare stopped and looked at Irene, who was walking with her head down. Look up. Irene flinched and instinctively lifted her gaze, meeting Cesari's deep crimson eyes at close range. Embarrassed, she looked away and explained softly, I'm just not used to being barefaced. Cesare held a hand out to stop her. No, you'll run into something. He then drew Irene naturally into his arms. Once she regained her balance, she looked at him worriedly and asked, Your Grace, is it really all right not to cover your face? I'm just worried you're so famous. What if someone recognizes you? Cesare looked at her and replied blandly, about that. Cesare said lightly, even if someone does recognize me, it won't matter. They'll only think I've come to have a drink with my lover. Irene replied urgently, Your Grace, that's exactly the biggest problem. The moon hung high in the night sky. Dim lights glowed from the buildings lining the street, and loud noise drifted from a tavern not far away. Irene stood at the tavern entrance, looking into the noisy interior. Father, the tavern was brightly lit. Men sat around wooden tables, laughing loudly. The air was thick with alcohol and clamor. Dancers moved in the center to the music. He isn't in the gambling den, is he? Cesare stayed beside Irene as the two of them made their way through the crowd. The cheers inside the tavern were deafening. Surrounded by the noise, Irene's gaze was suddenly caught by a certain figure. Looking at that back, a wave stirred in Irene's heart. That person, fragments of memory surfaced in her mind. I want to buy some medicine, something that will let me die beautifully and without pain. The cheering in the tavern interrupted her thoughts. Marlena, 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 standing at the center of the stage, her red hair burned like fire. Merle now seemed to sense something, her gaze pausing briefly over the crowd. Irene stood below the stage, held tightly in Cesari's embrace. Irene lowered the brim of her hat. I had no idea that Marlena was her. She's actually dancing here. Her gaze is strange. Did she recognize me? Marlena stood beneath the spotlight, her red lips parting as she gave a sigh. She gripped the microphone, and her singing rang through the tavern. Men, you're all trash. Any woman who trusts a man is a fool. Your disgusting lies and sweet words. Every one of you is a worthless fraud. Listening to the lyrics, Cesare smiled with amusement. That song is quite interesting. Irene looked at him a little awkwardly. The lyrics. Cesare lowered his head. Do you know her? Irene was startled. No, I don't know her. Irene withdrew her gaze from the stage. Let's go. Let's find my father. Standing in the spotlight, Marlena's eyes held a trace of icy resolve. The two of them came before a heavy wooden door. Cesare stopped. Are you sure you want to see him? Irene pressed her lips together tightly. Yes. She reached out and took hold of the doorknob. I need to see with my own eyes what exactly he's doing. And as for him trying to sell me, I have to settle things with him once and for all. Cesare watched her quietly, his crimson eyes giving away nothing. In that case, let's go. The heavy wooden door slowly opened with a shrill, scraping noise. The room was filled with a foul, murky air. Heavy breathing rose and fell in the dark corners, accompanied by broken silhouettes. In the dim room, a drunken man muttered, Did you put something in the wine? I haven't even done anything yet, and I'm already about to lose control. Standing at the doorway, Irene trembled violently with rage and humiliation. Cesare turned his head slightly. Are you surprised? Irene's face was pale, tiny beads of sweat forming on her forehead. See? Cesare, what is this? In a daze, she murmured, Father. Father. Cesare lowered his gaze slightly. He drew Irene completely into his arms, his large palm covering her eyes firmly. It's all right, Irene. It's all right now. Slowly. Breathe. Avo. Man sat by the bedside, looking at her sleeping child and murmuring softly, Irene. You took it too, didn't you? She let out a light laugh, then gave a long sigh. Bending down, the woman said with a dark, bitter look in her eyes, I can still smell another woman's perfume on your father's clothes. Where exactly has he been fooling around with women? Do you know? He won't even share a bed with me. After a moment of silence, the woman gently patted Irene again. You're all I have, Irene. 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 The soft patting echoed in her memory, her mother's voice low and broken. For this pitiful mother, you're all I have, Irene. Irene suddenly came back to herself, her breathing turning ragged and uneven. It's all right. Breathe slowly. Water splashed, followed by a shrill scream. A man collapsed onto the floor in a sorry heap. What is this? What the hell is going on? Cesare looked down at him from above. Selling your own daughter and then doing this filthy kind of thing here. You bastard. Trembling all over, the man begged incoherently. Why, Your Grace? Why are you here? No, this is just... Cesare cut him off. Stay alive quietly. As you can see, I've become rather impulsive lately. If I were to accidentally slit your throat, what do you suppose you would do then? This really is your last chance. Cesare strode out of the room, carrying Irene. He settled her onto a sofa and knelt before her on one knee. Irene, you can open your eyes now. It's over. Irene's fingers trembled slightly. She clutched at his sleeve. Cesare pulled her into his arms, his broad hand pressing gently to the back of her head. It's all right. From now on, everything will get better. The heavy wooden door slowly opened with a creak. Rotan stood at the entrance and bowed respectfully. Your Grace, Marlena requests an audience. Your Grace. Cesari's fingers slid through Irene's hair. This isn't a good time. Rotan stood silently in the shadows. That's too cruel. You clearly knew she would come see him. You could easily have stopped her from meeting Irene. Cesare sat in an armchair, his expression cold. I've already restrained myself from doing anything worse. According to the original plan, he shouldn't have seen her today either. That would have helped Irene make up her mind. But seeing her face made me soften. Rotan looked at Cesare and said, if you were going to soften, then you shouldn't have let Baron Elrod see her in the first place. Cesare replied calmly. That was what Irene wanted. Rotan fell silent for a moment. Not only that, perhaps you deliberately let her see that scene, so she would completely turn away from her father. Irene has always been far too soft-hearted when it comes to blood ties. Rotan spoke again. Then what do you intend to do about Marlena? Even though the laboratory has been closed, she's still searching everywhere for Irene. It doesn't seem like she plans to give up easily. Cesare turned his face slightly, his tone indifferent. Let her see Irene. She still has her uses in many ways. Rotan bowed and prepared to withdraw. Then Cesare seemed to remember something. Oh, one more thing. In tomorrow morning's paper, publish the news that we're getting married. Make sure Irene can never change her mind again. Irene suddenly opened her eyes wide, gasping awake from a dream. Curled up at the edge of the bed, her chest rose and fell violently, cold sweat soaking her clothes. She let out a deep sigh and buried her face in her hands. I showed that childish side of myself again. No matter what, Father. A heavy pounding at the door suddenly shattered the morning quiet. Miss Elrod, are you inside? Irene took a deep breath, trying hard to steady her racing heart. I'm coming. I'm coming out now. Irene lifted a hand and adjusted the plain glasses on the bridge of her nose. A little self-conscious, she pulled her shawl tighter around herself. May I ask who it is? Miss Elrod, over here, please. Countless noisy voices rushed in like a tide. Outside, a crowd with feverish expressions packed the doorway. They waved papers and pens in their hands and shoved forward in a frenzy. Please comment on your engagement to Grand Duke Cesare. We heard you threaten the Grand Duke. Is that true? I heard you said if he didn't marry you, you'd kill him. The crowd shouted over one another. Hey, don't push. I was here first. Irene stood frozen. What on earth is going on? Just as the chaos was about to spiral out of control, a deafening gunshot split the air. Bang! Michel raised his pistol high. Everyone, the uproar fell into instant silence. All at once, everyone stopped moving and looked in terror toward the sound. Could you all please be quiet? You're frightening Our Lady. Irene stared at the scene before her in shock. What is happening? The noisy scene instantly fell dead silent. Michel holstered the gun and quickly walked over to Irene. I will handle this. Please, my lady, go back inside first. Gripping the edge of her clothing anxiously, Irene asked, Michel, what exactly is going on? Michel did not answer directly. Instead, he took a box from inside his coat and handed it to Irene. You must have been frightened. Please have some of this. I bought this chocolate from a shop. It's pretty good. Wait, please wait. A noisy commotion rose from outside the residence. Let me in too. I'm an acquaintance of Lady Irene's. Marlena struggled desperately in the crowd. I even got the Grand Duke's permission. Hurry and let me in. Good morning, Marlena. Why are you here? Did something happen? Marlena sighed, then abruptly stood and shouted. Of course something happened. Something huge. She rummaged through her bag, then flung a newspaper toward Irene. Have you read today's paper? Look at this. On the front page was a massive headline. The Grand Duke's bride is Irene Elrod. Irene took the paper with trembling hands, overcome with shock. So he really did make the announcement public? Marlena looked at her with a complicated expression and called softly, Irene. Marlena tightly grasped Irene's hand. Please tell me honestly, how did things end up like this? If there was any coercion involved, then no matter what, I will help you. I'll find a way somehow. Memories came flooding back. Wearing a black cloak, Marlena stood before the desk and said in a low voice, I want something that will let me die with dignity and with as little pain as possible. Irene sat behind the desk and replied, but that will take some time. Marlena frowned. Time? Irene thought for a moment before answering, about a month. And please come to my laboratory once every 3 days. To make that kind of medicine, I need to carry out proper examinations. Also, you must see a specialist. I heard the after effects of a miscarriage can be very serious. If you want to look your most beautiful at that moment, then you must keep your body healthy. Beneath her hood, Marlena felt a flash of bitterness. A poison. And I still have to wait an entire month? During that month, there was never any so-called formal treatment at all. Irene would simply set a delicate chocolate cake in front of Marlena. Between the two of them, there was only trivial conversation. The more it continued, the more Marlena found the apothecary before her strangely peculiar. She was obviously just a poor apothecary, and yet she always casually served luxurious desserts. Like a talkative friend, Irene went on and on about all sorts of boring little things. Smiling, she lifted the teapot and said, I found a wonderful herb, so I brewed it in a tea. This tea helps improve circulation and also helps you relax. Here, please drink some, all right? Marlena picked up the teacup and took a sip. Irene leaned in a little closer and asked softly, how does it taste? But at some point, those ordinary, odd little meetings gradually became something I looked forward to. I want to live again. Clutching Irene tightly, she said in a trembling voice, because of you. You're the reason I want to live again. Irene answered softly, Marlena. I chose to become the Grand Duke's wife of my own will. Marlena looked up, her eyes full of shock. Irene lowered her gaze and confessed in a low voice, I committed a crime. But Cesare covered it up for me. He even helped me repay my debts. We happened to need a Grand Duchess. He made me the offer. Marlena looked at her in silence, then called softly, Irene. Irene lifted her head blankly. Do you really think that was entirely your own decision? It's only the outcome shaped by his will. Someone as naive as you could never understand. The flowing sound of a piano echoed through the empty room. Cesare sat alone at the instrument, his fingers moving deftly over the keys, drawing out a beautiful melody. Cesare does not possess human emotions. Crisp applause rang through the room. Your playing has gained more depth, Cesare. Cesare stopped playing and turned to look at the newcomer. Is it because you've fallen in love? A servant set down tea, the cups and saucers clinking softly. Leon sat down on the sofa and looked at Cesare across from him. So in the end, you've decided to marry Miss Elrod after all. Didn't you once say that keeping her by your side would only bring misfortune? Cesare lifted his teacup and replied calmly, yes. After thinking alone for about 7 years, I changed my mind. Leon repeated in some surprise, 7 years? Cesare took a sip of tea and continued. In any case, I will soon be taking Miss Irene with me into the Imperial Palace. Before the wedding, I should introduce her to you. After all, you're my only twin brother, Leon. Leon nodded in agreement. All right. Cesare set down his teacup, his tone turning cool again. Soon, I still have to deal with the matter of the Senate chairman. Leon frowned slightly, deep in thought. That won't be easy. He really is the key figure opposing the imperial family, that old fox. He's incredibly cunning. How are you planning to deal with him? Cesare reached out, picked up a biscuit, and crushed it in his palm. Very soon, he's going to cause trouble. Or more precisely, his son-in-law will. Cesare suddenly tightened his grip, crushing the biscuit in his hand to powder. No matter what, I'll use that as bait. Leon lifted his teacup and replied, from the way you say that, it sounds like you've already seen the future somewhere. You sound more and more like you're daydreaming. Cesare, are you all right, Cesare? In a low voice, Cesare answered, my brother's teacher said. I think I'm going a little mad. Leon trembled slightly, his expression turning complicated. Cesare pulled a pocket watch from his coat. I've been thinking the whole time about who threw those 10 stones at my child, and who dismembered that corpse and took it away. My mind is full of nothing but those thoughts. Cesare suddenly clenched the metal chain of the watch in his palm, and it let out a harsh scraping sound. So that's why I want to get married as soon as possible. Otherwise, Cesare raised his chin slightly, a chilling smile appearing on his face. I feel like I might personally kill half the nobility of the Trawan Empire. Then be careful on the way, Marlena. standing in the street. Marlena turned to look back at the building behind her. Eileen stood on the terrace, waving goodbye. Marlena withdrew her gaze, her expression growing grave. Listen carefully, Eileen. Grand Duke Cesare has no human emotions at all. Sitting on the sofa and leaning forward, Marlena said, I've seen with my own eyes how he deals with his enemies. Marlena's fingers twisted together unconsciously. He's cold to the extreme. His calculations are precise, and he doesn't allow even the slightest mistake. Marlena recalled that moment. Cesare standing before her, handing over a thick stack of documents. There was no warmth at all in those dark red eyes. He's like a demon wearing human skin. Eileen, he may hide his true nature in front of you, but Marlena, Eileen, gently interrupted her. I know, Eileen replied calmly. I've met His Grace many times too. But if I don't become the Grand Duke's wife, my circumstances will force me to leave this country. And if that happens, I'll never be able to see His Grace again. I can't bear that outcome, so I chose marriage. Marlena froze, staring at Eileen's profile. Eileen lowered her head slightly, a shy smile appearing on her face. It's a little embarrassing, but I really care about him. What in the world is going on? Eileen held the newspaper with trembling hands. On the front page was a striking side profile of Cesare in cold print. I never imagined he would announce it to the entire world so openly. His Grace and I are really going to. She unconsciously raised a hand, her fingertips brushing her lips, her cheeks flushing red. I'd get married. Eileen suddenly covered her face with the newspaper and let out a long sigh. Just what is His Grace thinking? At that moment, the sharp screech of brakes shattered the quiet. A red car stopped not far away. Eileen looked up in surprise at the person who had appeared before her. Your Grace? You want to see me right now? Yes. This is a direct order from His Grace the Grand Duke. You're to be brought to him immediately. This uniform looks familiar, but Eileen recalled what Cesare had once said to her. Cesare had bent down until his eyes were level with hers. Eileen, when I send someone to pick you up, I would never entrust that to just anyone. At the very least, I'll send someone you know. So never again go off with a stranger the way you did today. Do you understand? Eileen came back to herself. There's no harm in being cautious. Then, when a hand suddenly shot out and clamped hard around her wrist. Wait, I'm afraid there's no time for you to change, Miss Eileen. The guard suddenly pulled out a white handkerchief and pressed it tightly over Eileen's mouth and nose. Her round glasses fell to the ground, the lenses trembling from the impact. Eileen's hands were bound tight with coarse rope, her body curled up in a dark, damp corner, trembling uncontrollably. Manga. Eileen kept her eyes shut and sobbed under her breath. Your Grace, I'm so scared. A pair of black boots stopped in front of her. Eileen shuddered violently as the blindfold over her eyes was roughly torn away. Manga. Eileen kept her eyes shut and sobbed under her breath. Your Grace, I'm so scared. A pair of black boots stopped in front of her. Eileen shuddered violently as the blindfold over her eyes was roughly torn away. Calm down, Eileen. A familiar voice sounded above her. Eileen forced her eyes open, tears blurring her vision as she gasped for breath, trying to make out the figure before her. Why, Your Grace? Cesare stood before her, collar open, hair slightly disheveled. In those dark red eyes, there was a trace of exhaustion and urgency. I'm not crying anymore. I was wrong. They said Your Grace had already gone to the front to fight. Curled on the floor, she looked up at Cesare. Your Grace, why? Are you here? I see. Why would I come? Cesare loosened his tightly clenched hand. The rough rope that had bound Eileen slid to the ground. First, Cesare reached out and gently stroked the top of Eileen's head. Let's go home. Eileen suddenly trembled, breathing hard, a fine sheen of sweat breaking out across her forehead. Your Grace, are you awake? Heavy footsteps echoed through the empty room. I've been waiting for this moment, for you to open your eyes. A man crouched down, and shadow instantly engulfed Eileen. Hello there. Eileen's pupils contracted sharply, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. In the man's hand was a sharp dagger, which he toyed with idly, its blade reflecting a cold glint in the darkness. Future Grand Duchess, all the regular guard around the estate have disappeared. Even the emergency reinforcements are nowhere to be seen. It has already been confirmed that there is a traitor among the military high command. The investigation is underway. One officer cursed through gritted teeth, muttering, just who could it be? Rotan looked at Cesare and said, I'll organize the list and hand it to you by tomorrow. As for Miss Eileen, There's been no change in her condition. Yes, since the situation has changed, she may no longer be under complete control. I'm going to see. Sinan hurried after Cesare and called out, "Your Grace." With a grave expression, Sinan asked, "Even if his father-in-law was once a soldier, shouldn't we suspect him as the mastermind?" Cesare replied coldly, "Not the Marquis, his son-in-law. He's the one distributing the drug. Every single dose circulating in Fiori came from him." Diego looked shocked and asked, "How do you know all that? Did you investigate it yourself?" Cesare gave no direct answer. "Enough. Let's go." Sinan and Diego exchanged glances, both wearing complicated expressions. While slowly wiping his hands, Cesare murmured in a low voice, "Eileen must be waiting for me." Night had deepened. The cawing of crows echoed over the silent estate. Eileen, bound tightly with ropes, lay weakly on the dark, damp floor while several kidnappers looked down on her from above. In a weak voice, Eileen said, "I don't understand. What does he want from me?" But His Grace the Grand Duke is a cold man. Even if I'm the one destined to become his wife, he would never accept any loss for my sake. I'm just a worthless hostage. One of the kidnappers crouched down, idly playing with a sharp dagger, and let out a contemptuous sneer. That's what I thought too. But now, it seems that's not the case. Rumor has it that when the Grand Duke was still a prince, the reason he fled the battlefield was all because of you. Eileen shuddered. Fled? Impossible. That day, the kidnapper said with a crazed expression, "I'm not trying to get anything. I just want to destroy all of this." Think carefully. My life was ruined by that bastard. In the name of fairness, shouldn't he lose something equally precious? Eileen was roughly slammed onto the ground and let out a muffled cry of pain. Eileen, if one day someone takes you away and you're about to suffer something terrible, don't resist. Just stay still. Cesare had once told her in silence, "As long as you wait quietly, I will definitely come save you." Eileen repeated it to herself in her heart. "You'll come." Eileen bit her lip hard. She suddenly lifted her head. Fear was no longer the only thing in her eyes, because His Grace never lies. Seeing this, the kidnapper let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "What's with that look? Do you think glaring at me will do anything?" The kidnapper gave a string of skin-crawling laughs, then stretched out a rough hand and grabbed Eileen by the chin. "What is it, my lady?" Eileen suddenly spat. Spittle splashed across the kidnapper's face. Her voice trembled, but it was ice cold as she said, "Get your filthy hands off me." The kidnapper froze, the smile on her face instantly stiffening. She stared at Eileen in disbelief, a violent fury igniting in her eyes. She abruptly raised her hand, then stopped midway. "Hey, what's this?" The kidnapper cursed under her breath. "So that bastard Cesare has been hovering around you for a reason after all." Eileen bit her lip hard, tears filling her eyes, her body trembling with fear. The kidnapper let out a heavy breath, her expression twisting further. "Damn it. Unbelievable." She suddenly reached out and caressed Eileen's cheek. Eileen struggled in pain. "Stay away from me." The kidnapper leaned close to her ear and let out a ghastly laugh. "Don't cry, all right? Since things have already come to this, why don't the two of us have a little fun?" Calm down, Eileen. Lord Cesare always keeps his word, so he'll come save you very soon." Tears swirled in her eyes. She clenched her teeth and endured the humiliation and terror. "Just hold on a little longer. Just a little longer." In the darkness, that nauseating hand was drawing closer. In despair, Eileen shut her eyes and called that name over and over in her heart. "Lord Cesare." At that moment, the heavy door let out a piercing crash, as it was thrown open by overwhelming force. A figure appeared in the doorway. Cesari's low voice rang through the room. "Good girl, Eileen. You didn't even cry out." Eileen's eyes flew open, tears trembling in them. Through her blurred vision, that familiar figure came into focus. Before the kidnapper could even react, Cesare had already flashed in front of her. A vicious kick swept out, accompanied by the imagined sound of shattering bones. The kidnapper screamed as her whole body was sent flying by the tremendous impact. "Damn it, how did you, Eileen?" Sat collapsed on the ground, gulping in air. "Your Grace, I want to go home." Cesare stepped forward, walking toward her one step at a time. "I'm afraid that won't do." The kidnappers shrank back in terror, cold sweat sliding down their faces. "Because tonight, you'll be staying at the Grand Duke's estate." He slowly raised the revolver in his hand. With a crisp metallic click, the cylinder locked into place, the muzzle reflecting a cold sheen in the dim light. Diego lowered his head and asked Cesare for instructions. Your Grace, how should that person be dealt with? Without even turning his head, Cesare ordered, keep her alive. Diego bowed respectfully. As you command. Cesare lifted the unconscious Eileen into his arms and strode away from the scene. Night blanketed the estate. The old man has been begging to be granted an audience. Even with his son-in-law sent to the guillotine, he's still pleading for his daughter. In his hand, Cesare swirled a glass with ice and replied coldly, I'll let him live. Leaning back in the armchair, Cesare shook the ice in his glass and said, if I were to take your remaining, I as well. Sinan stood nearby in silence. Cesare let out a soft laugh. If you became blind, it would be hard for you to keep your current position, wouldn't it? Suddenly, there came a knock at the door. Eileen pushed it open and stood in the doorway, breathless, saying softly, and my lord, I heard you were looking for me. Eileen hurried over to Cesare and gasped, Your Grace, your hand. Sinan gave Eileen a slight bow and then withdrew from the room. Good evening, Miss Eileen. Standing before Cesare, Eileen looked at his bandaged hand with concern. You were hurt by that sword just now, weren't you? She carefully took Cesare's hand in both of hers. Is the wound deep? Let me see. Cesare looked at her and called softly, Eileen. Eileen raised her head and met his gaze. Cesare said slowly, back then. You were waiting too. Eileen looked puzzled. Back then? Cesare looked at her and replied, because I promised I would protect you. You must have been terribly frightened. You're always so timid. You probably cried a lot, didn't you? He suddenly reached out with his bandaged hand and pulled Eileen into his arms. I am sorry, Eileen. Startled, Eileen shrank in his embrace and asked helplessly, what do you mean, Your Grace? You always save me whenever I'm in danger. Today, too, you came for me. You've always kept your promises. There's only one promise I failed to keep. Cesare gazed at Eileen in his arms. That look again, exactly the same as back then. Cesare called softly, Eileen. It's time to sleep. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. In the stillness of the deep night, its hands moved slowly. Lying beneath the covers, Eileen heard her own heartbeat with startling clarity in the silence. She turned quickly to look at Cesare beside her. And my lord, doesn't your arm hurt? Cesare lay on his side next to her and answered calmly, no. Then he reached out and drew Eileen into his arms. You must have been frightened today. Sleep. I'll stay by your side until you fall asleep. Eileen clutched the edge of the blanket tightly, her cheeks flushing red, her heartbeat growing even faster. Outside the window, the night was deep. Cesare sensed her stiffness. Are you uncomfortable? Eileen shook her head slightly and replied in a soft voice, no. Eileen curled up under the covers, her toes curling unconsciously. If anything, being in your arms makes me feel safe. Teacher said I was really terrified today. Cesare turned his face toward her. Didn't you say before that you didn't like this? Eileen suddenly pushed herself up and explained in a fluster. No, that was because, in her mind, that kiss surfaced and her cheeks instantly grew scorching hot. I'm still nervous, but when you touch me, I don't feel uncomfortable at all. It doesn't even feel wrong. If I could, I'd even want to get a little closer. Cesare bent down and placed a kiss on her. Eileen held her breath and let out the faintest gasp. Her eyes widened in shock. Your Grace. Cesare leaned near her ear and asked in a voice dusted with a teasing smile. Looking at me like that, are you asking for a kiss? Eileen fell silent. If a line were drawn between good and evil, he would undoubtedly stand on the side of evil. But even so, Cesare reached out with his bandaged hand and gently soothed Eileen. He was the only one who could save me from every sin. He was my salvation, so even if it's like this now. Eileen reached out and gripped Cesare's clothing tightly. After a moment of silence, she said softly, I think, it's all right now. Cesare gave a slight start and asked in a low voice, what is all right now? Eileen lifted her face, a mixture of shyness and resolve in her eyes. That kiss. Cesare stared at her, his gaze gradually darkening. Eileen. He reached out with his bandaged hand and caressed her cheek gently. Don't regret this. Cesare kissed Eileen's lips and pulled her tightly into his arms. Moonlight flowed quietly through the window. On the table, a glass of water trembled and let out a clear clink. Outside, the sky gradually brightened, clouds drifting slowly through the morning light. At last, the turmoil of the previous night returned to stillness. Eileen had fallen asleep, her breathing soft, and even in the quiet room. Sitting by the bedside, Cesare gently brushed her cheek with his bandaged hand, his fingertips lingering in her hair. He watched Eileen sleeping in silence, emotion unreadable in his dark red eyes. "Don't. Your Grace, please don't go. Please. Your Grace." This war is truly dangerous. Cesare walked silently toward the door. The old butler followed a few steps behind, continuing to urge him, "Your Grace, since this is your last night before departure, at least see her once." Cesare stopped and remained silent for a long time. "Even if I see her now, there's nothing I can do, so..." Cesare strode away without looking back, heading toward the end of the corridor. On the other side of the heavy door, Eileen sat collapsed on the floor in helplessness. "When I return, let me comfort her then." He stood alone before the towering guillotine, the setting sun stretching his shadow long. Several crows circled in the blood-red sky, crying harshly. A red bird beat its wings high across the crimson sky, letting out a piercing cry. Cesare sat quietly by the bed, looking at the sleeping Eileen. His bandaged hand clenched tightly into a fist. "That's right. This is the world in which you exist, and this is the first and the last event given to me." Cesare bent down and placed a gentle kiss on Eileen's forehead. "Sweet dreams, Eileen, even if I can never awaken from this nightmare." A few days later, a heavy guillotine towered high over the square. Its sharp blade reflected a cold gleam onto the sunlight. At the execution grounds, a frenzy of cheers erupted as a prisoner, hands bound behind his back and face full of terror, knelt before the guillotine. As the blade came crashing down, the crowd watching sank into near-mad ecstasy. They waved their arms, cheering one after another. Inside the carriage, Diego frowned as he looked out the window and asked, how did an execution turn into something with the atmosphere of a festival? Michel, who was driving, replied, "It's all because of those damned superstitions. They say that if you can get a piece of a criminal's body, you'll gain good luck. Apparently, the corpses of nobles and young girls are the most sought after. It's insane. A sight like this is practically an insult to human reason." Leaning by the window, Cesare rested his fingers against his chin, looking coldly at the passing streets outside. "If you want to stay sane in this world, I think the best way is to get married as soon as possible." Sitting nearby, Rotan turned his head, his eyes deep and solemn. "I'm sorry for calling you out so suddenly, Sir Rotan. Cesari's recent behavior has been somewhat unusual. There are even rumors that he may slaughter the citizens of the Trawan Empire. As his brother, I can't help but be concerned. He would never make such moves or speak such words without reason. Something must have happened. So, Sir Rotan." Leon set down his teacup, his gaze turning sharp and cold. "There is something I need you to do in secret. Cesare absolutely must not find out." Night fell. The lights of the estate glowed in the darkness. "Thank you, my lady, very much for the invitation, Miss Eileen." Diego excitedly showed off the gift in his hand. "This is the rabbit doll I told you about." Rotan, holding a heavy stack of books, added hesitantly, "But, Miss Eileen, haven't you always preferred books to dolls?" Sinan offered over an exquisite box. "I thought you might need a fountain pen, so I brought one." Michel held a large box of chocolates and leaned in with a grin. "Still, nothing beats delicious snacks, does it? Miss Eileen, aren't you a little too old to be receiving dolls as gifts?" Eileen stood there stiffly, her arms full of gifts she had just received. I mean, Eileen adjusted her glasses, trying to calm her embarrassment and confusion. Why don't we eat first?" The dining table was laden with lavish dishes, from fresh salads to carefully prepared meat dishes. "Miss Eileen, did you make all of this yourself?" "Oh my God." Michel was so moved, he seemed on the verge of tears. "When did our Miss Eileen grow up this much? She even made all this food with her own hands." Eileen twisted her fingers together a little nervously and replied softly, "Recently, everyone has gone through a lot because of me, so, at the very least, I want to treat everyone to a meal." Diego was in the middle of chewing a big mouthful. "Oh, don't say that. The way you put it makes it sound like we've all been suffering this whole time." Diego laughed a bit too carefree, food still stuck at the corner of his mouth. "By the way, has the Baron gone out again? Looks like he still hasn't come to his senses." The conversation around the table gradually died down. Diego, who had been biting into a piece of meat on his fork, suddenly realized he had misspoken and froze. Miss Eileen, I'm very sorry. Oh dear. Eileen lowered her eyes and said softly, "It's all right. I understand why everyone dislikes my father, and I know that the fact I still can't sever ties with him must be frustrating for all of you." Silence fell over the table. Michel stopped moving, looking at Eileen with concern. Sinan cleared his throat and broke the tension. "More importantly than that, how are you feeling? Not long ago, you went through something so terrible. I was worried that entertaining us might overexert you." Eileen suddenly lifted her head and waved both hands flusteredly as she explained, "I'm fine." After all, the Duke arrived very quickly that day. The moment she mentioned that name, Eileen's cheeks instantly flushed crimson. Duke Cesare. In Eileen's mind, that lingering moment resurfaced. Eileen's whole face turned red, as if steam were rising from her head. She stammered, "WH when it comes to the Duke." Rotan suddenly cut in. "His Majesty the Emperor wishes to meet you privately, Miss Eileen." Eileen went completely still. Her green eyes were filled with disbelief. Sunlight filtered through the lush leaves, while white doves circled above the grand palace buildings, crying softly. Eileen walked down the magnificently decorated corridor. Beside her, Rotan asked in a deep voice, "Are you nervous?" Eileen folded her hands in front of herself and replied a little tensely, "Well, it has been a long time since I last saw His Majesty in person. Now that I'm engaged to the Duke, I knew I would have to meet him sooner or later, but it still feels like this day came too quickly." Rotan walked forward without looking aside. "In the past, you often accompanied the Duke in attending His Majesty, so it shouldn't feel too awkward." Eileen stopped walking, unease and worry flickering across her face. The two of them arrived before a massive pair of doors. Rotan stepped aside and bowed slightly. "In that case, please go in, Miss Eileen." Eileen took a deep breath and slowly stepped forward. "You've come, Miss Eileen." Leon sat at the seat of honor, his hands folded, his gaze resting on her. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Eileen lowered her head a little hurriedly, lifting her skirt to curtsy. "I pay my respects to your Majesty." Leon gave a slight nod. "You've even learned court etiquette. It seems you really have grown a great deal. Thank you for coming. There are a few things I want to ask you." Leon came to a stop before her. "Tell me, do you bear resentment toward the Troan Empire?" Leon leaned slightly closer, lowering himself to her ear as he continued. "Or have you ever asked Cesare to erase half the Empire's population for your sake?" Eileen abruptly raised her head and stared at Leon in shock. "What? I thought so." He lifted his teacup, his tone returning to calm. "The Miss Eileen I know would never do such a thing." Sitting across from him, Eileen replied softly, "Yes, your Majesty." Duke Cesare probably never really said he would kill half the Empire's population. But considering the way he's been lately, even if he did say something like that, I wouldn't be surprised. Holding her teacup, Eileen's fingertips trembled slightly. "Your Majesty, about that matter." Leon watched her in silence. Those deep eyes seemed capable of seeing through everything. Eileen was so intimidated by that gaze that she unconsciously shrank back a little. "Huh, it seems you really do have something you want to say." He leaned back in his chair, his expression softening somewhat. "Since that day, it's already been 4 years, hasn't it?" Eileen lowered her eyes and replied softly, "Yes, your Majesty." "For years. That's right, for years." Looking at her, Leon spoke with a strangely unreadable meaning in his voice. "Eileen, do you still?" In an instant, Eileen's thoughts were dragged back to that dark past. In her memory, she sat collapsed on the cold floor, weeping in despair, crying out, "Do you resent me?" Eileen knelt on the cold floor, both hands gripping desperately at the other man's clothing. "Your Majesty, I beg you, please let me see him. Just once, please." Leon looked down at the pitifully pleading Eileen, his tone cold. "If he refuses to see you, how exactly am I meant to force him?" Tears streamed down Eileen's face, her voice trembling with fear. "Everyone says this war is extremely dangerous. Why? Why did you send your own younger brother to that hell? How insolent." Eileen jolted, eyes wide with shock. "Everything that is happening now is Cesari's own decision. To stop Cesare, he risked his life to place me on the throne, only to walk toward death himself. Do you think that makes me happy?" He lowered his eyes, his voice dropping. "But Cesare probably wanted to protect Trawan, to protect the Trawan where you live." Eileen stood there blankly, looking dazed. Leon changed tone, sounding a little lighter. "Though it's late, I should still congratulate you. Happy marriage, Lady Elrod." Eileen lowered her eyes and replied softly, "Thank you, your Majesty." Leon's smile faded, his expression turning serious. Now let's speak properly. You must have noticed that Cesare has seemed somewhat strange lately. I asked you here today because I wanted to know whether you might be aware of anything. Before Eileen could answer, a loud crash suddenly came from outside. The door was violently pushed open. A hand in a white leather glove pressed against the doorframe. Cesari's figure appeared in the doorway. Eileen, Cesare, walked into the room, a hint of pressure in his tone. Why do you always wander off by yourself, leaving your lonely husband behind? And you found out faster than I expected. Is Sir Rotan still alive? Cesare walked to the table and replied coolly, Who knows? That depends on your answer, brother. Leon smiled. Don't be too hard on him. I asked him to do it. Was it really necessary to summon? Eileen behind my back. Cesare pushed a freshly prepared cup of hot tea toward Eileen. Drink this. That one's already cold. Leon said softly, He lowered his eyes, looking a little lonely. All right, I was wrong, okay? Leon looked at Eileen and said, If I frightened you, I'm sorry, Eileen. I only hoped we could speak a little more comfortably. Eileen lowered her head hurriedly and replied softly, Thank you, Lord Cesare. Since it's been so long, how about the two of us speak alone for a while, Eileen? My lady, I'll have someone escort you to my private garden. You like plants, don't you? I'm sure you'll enjoy yourself there. Flattered and somewhat flustered, Eileen was about to rise and answer. It would be my haunt, Eileen. Cesare suddenly reached out his fingertips, lightly hooking a strand of her hair. Go have a look around. But this time, don't leave your husband behind and wander off alone again. Eileen stared blankly at Cesare, her breathing faltering slightly. Leon looked at Cesare awkwardly. Sorry, but do you not see that I'm still standing here? Walking down the corridor, Eileen let out a long breath. At last, she could breathe again. Even so, when Cesare faced his brother, he really was different. Their bond still seemed as deep as ever. But as for me, for some reason Eileen stopped walking and looked ahead in confusion. A faint smell of smoke drifted through the air. Who would smoke in the Imperial Palace? Following the scent, Eileen looked toward the terrace at the end of the corridor and made out a figure. Onella was standing there, a slim cigarette between her fingers, smoke curling upward through the air. She turned her head, her gaze settling on the approaching Eileen. Oh dear, Eileen coughed from the sudden wave of smoke. Hello there, you over there. May I ask who you are? The attendant beside her immediately stepped forward and introduced her. This is Lady Eileen of the Elrod family. Onella showed a look of sudden realization. All right, that's your name. I'm not very good with names. After all, this isn't exactly a face people remember easily. She casually dropped the burning cigarette to the floor. Her red high heel came down and ground out the last spark. In any case, Eileen Elrod. Onella folded her arms across her chest and lifted her chin slightly, her tone carrying a trace of amusement. Congratulations on your marriage. Eileen looked somewhat awkward. She lifted her skirt slightly and replied, Thank you. So, you must have heard that rumor too, right? About that lady, the one who was originally supposed to marry him. The original match wasn't the Emperor, but Grand Duke Cesare. Onella let out a sigh. In any case, things must have been hard on you lately too, Miss Eileen. Eileen looked at her blankly and asked instinctively, What do you mean? Onella looked at Eileen and said, I heard things aren't going well with your family. Which brings me to this. How are you planning to prepare your dowry? She looked surprised. Don't tell me. You didn't know about that either. Eileen suddenly shuddered, her whole body stiffening in place. Onella continued, under normal circumstances, the bride is expected to prepare a dowry. After all, your mother has passed away, and it seems there's no suitable noblewoman elder by your side. So, I imagine it would be hard for you to learn even these basic customs. Eileen bit down hard on her lower lip. She felt deeply ashamed, feeling unbearably foolish. Until now, she had only vaguely assumed that getting married would be enough. She had sworn never to become a burden to Grand Duke Cesare. Eileen's hand clutched her skirt tightly as Onella watched her and murmured thoughtfully, Then how about this? I happen to be looking for a new maid, Eileen. Eileen froze where she stood, her body trembling involuntarily. Onella continued, If your circumstances really are that bad, then at least until your dowry is prepared. Steady footsteps sounded from the end of the corridor. Didn't I tell you to go look around the garden? What are you doing here, Eileen? She turned her head, and his gaze landed on Onella as he greeted her coolly. It's been a long time, Miss Pavarini. Onella smiled at Cesare and said, Have you been well? I should have greeted you at the last banquet. Standing nearby, Eileen watched Onella in silence. She could feel Onella's feelings for Cesare. Onella had once said she wanted to marry Cesare. Eileen lowered her eyes and thought to herself, it would only be natural for her to resent me. Onella suddenly coughed softly. Saw the weather is still a little cold, and I dressed too lightly again. Cesare silently removed his coat. Onella looked at Cesare and sighed softly, how thoughtful you are. But Cesare, straightening the collar for her, Cesare said, Put it on. It's cold. Eileen looked helplessly flustered. But it's not actually that cold. I'm really fine. Standing not far away, Onella's smile froze instantly. She stared fixedly at Eileen, wrapped in Cesari's coat. As they walked down the corridor, Cesare asked, Are you asking for the laboratory to be reopened before the wedding? Eileen, walking beside him, replied softly, Yes. Cesare turned his head to look at her. I thought that matter had already been settled. Eileen lowered her head and explained a little hurriedly, It's just, I'm somewhat pressed for time. Cesare stopped and looked at Eileen. What is so urgent? Eileen was silent for a moment. It's just that, if you can reopen the laboratory for me, I think I can prepare my own dowry. Before this, I hadn't even considered such things. But marriage is, after all, between two people. Cesare withdrew his gaze and said lightly, It seems Onella said some strange things again. Eileen stopped walking and said, The dowry really is an issue, but Cesare turned and looked at her quietly. There's still many patients waiting for me. Some of them come to me regularly for medicine. I've been worried about them the whole time. And besides, the medicine I've been developing recently has finally started to work. Taking everything into account, I think reopening the laboratory as soon as possible is the right thing to do. Cesare watched her in silence and did not reply immediately. So, how much dowry are you planning to bring? Eileen flusteredly waved her hands. I'm still calculating. First, I need to look up the average amount for a dowry. Cesare gave a soft laugh and teased. If you don't have enough money, are you planning to sell opium or something? Eileen suddenly raised her head and protested loudly, No, absolutely not. I swear would never do something like that. Cesare stopped walking. Eileen, before she could react, Cesare had already put an arm around her shoulders. He bent down and kissed her. With his lips near her ear, Cesare said in a low, husky voice, Your dowry. I've already received it. Cesare pulled a pocket watch from inside his coat. Flustered, Eileen said, Your Grace, that. He let out a quiet laugh. Are you still calling me Your Grace? Should I just change my name to that title instead? Eileen blushed and lowered her head awkwardly. Lord Cesare. I'm not really sure of the proper amount for a dowry, but that thing is far too insignificant to count as one. Cesare lowered his eyes, his gaze resting on the pocket watch in his hand, his expression turning deep and unreadable. Long ago, I once had a watch exactly like this. It was a keepsake I got from a dead child. Even though it was broken and wouldn't even tick, I cherished it dearly. In order to come back, I had no choice but to use it, so I destroyed it with my own hands, Eileen. But later, you gave me a watch exactly like it as a gift. So, isn't that even more precious than the gold itself? Irene lifted her head and looked at him. Complex emotions shimmered in her eyes. Cesare clenched the pocket watch tightly in his palm. That's why. I don't need any dowry anymore. He looked at Irene, a faint smile touching his lips. I've already received far too much from you. The afterglow of the setting sun spilled over the grand building. A red dress and high heels lay scattered across the carpet. Ornella lounged lazily against a chaise, a slender cigarette between her fingers, slowly exhaling a stream of smoke. Did you go look in the garden? Why isn't it ready yet? Cesare turned his face and looked at Ornella with a cold expression. Please escort Miss Pavarini out. It seems she's lost. The corners of Ornella's lips curled into an amused smile. What remarkable compassion. Should I feel angry for being pitted like this? Regret. Ornella let out a light sound as the man bent down, kissing her neck and shoulder. Red wine slid down her skin, spreading through the dim, suggestive stillness. Ornella tipped her head back and let out a long sigh. Irene Elrod. On the quiet terrace, Irene sat alone in a rocking chair, clutching a book in her hands. Young Irene, holding a bouquet of lilies, had once shouted with a flushed face, Your Highness, I want to marry you. A faint smile appeared on Cesari's face. He reached out and gently patted Irene's head. You'll have to grow up a little more first, Irene. Hugging the flowers, little Irene looked up and asked innocently, how much bigger do I have to grow? Probably until you're as tall as that shrub. Young Irene let out a gasp. Irene lowered her head in a hurry. But that kind of tree can grow 15 meters tall. I suppose that meant our wedding would have to wait quite a while longer. Cesare gently ruffled her hair. If I really had to wait until I grew as tall as that tree, could I still become his spring branch bride? But since His Highness already promised to marry me, that still counted as half a success. Irene's fingertips lightly brushed over the yellow diary, and a bitter yet nostalgic smile touched her lips. The Grand Duke really was adorable back then. Even at that time, he was as gentle as ever. You must have noticed too, my younger brother seems to have changed a little lately. You said the war lasted 7 years, but it only lasted 3. During those days, I was never quite myself. I've already received too much from you. Irene sat in the rocking chair as it creaked back and forth. He really had changed. He wasn't the same person as before. Something must have happened. If only His Grace the Grand Duke could rely on me a little. But to make that happen, I first have to become someone worthy of being relied on. She gathered her thoughts. In any case, I should start with today's routine. Miss Irene, miss! An urgent shout came from afar. Diego stood beside a red convertible, one hand raised high as he called out loudly. At last, today's the day. Are we heading out? Sitting in the chair, Irene gripped the armrests tightly with both hands. I'll start with today's schedule. Just do well. As long as I act naturally, it'll be fine. Accompanied by the crisp sound of the doorbell, Irene pushed open the door of the bridal shop. The shop owner hurried over with a beaming smile. Welcome, Lady Elzert. My lady, today we will present you with the most perfect wedding dress. The enthusiastic attendants suddenly froze, their smiles stiffening on their faces. Irene lowered her head in haste, hands folded before her, looking rather at a loss. The attendants huddled together and whispered, first, perhaps we should do something about your bangs. Otherwise the dress will be hidden. Another attendant added, and her glasses. Don't forget her glasses. If that's really the problem, she can simply hide behind a veil. The owner stepped forward cautiously. Then, at least allow us to tidy your hair a little, if we may. Diego cut in coldly. Leave it as it is. The owner froze. A little flustered, she answered. What? But, at the very least, her hairstyle should match the gown. Diego turned his head, his gaze carrying unquestionable intimidation. You'd better just do your job. The owner could hardly breathe under the pressure. The Grand Duke had personally demanded the finest gown, yet we couldn't even touch a single strand of her hair. Diego stood beside Irene like a cold statue. He certainly hadn't asked for the finest hairstyle. Irene spoke softly. Mr. Diego, that's enough. Irene slowly took off her thick glasses and gently set them on the table. She raised her hand, slipping her fingers through her soft long hair and tucking the bangs that hid her face behind her ear. Diego stood stunned, his eyes fixed on her every movement. The attendants nearby also held their breath, staring in amazement at the scene before them. Irene lowered her head somewhat hurriedly, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. Will this be all right? One attendant gasped, my goodness. And another exclaimed right after, It's absolutely perfect. She's as pure as a fairy. Go prepare the chiffon, something light enough to flutter in the wind. Call the stylist at once. You look so beautiful. You're certain to become a bride recorded in imperial history. Irene stood among the flowers in a pure white wedding gown, while Diego watched from the side with a satisfied smile. The attendants clasped their hands together, their eyes full of astonishment. One of them softly suggested, would you like to look in a mirror now? Guided by the attendant, Irene walked toward the mirror. The moment she looked into it, her pupils contracted sharply, and she let out a small cry. I forgot for a moment why I avoid mirrors. The image in the glass began to warp. The once pure white gown was swallowed by shadow, and her face became blurred and indistinct. Irene stared at her reflection. Since when did I stop being able to see my own face clearly? From the depths of her memory came sudden, piercing screams. Your eyes. Do you know how disgusting your eyes are? They make me sick. It's horrifying. A woman leaned close, her voice dripping with malice. I really wonder what His Highness the Prince must be thinking every time he looks at you. Irene has eyes that are so terrifying. The cold metallic sensation approached again. Sharp scissors were aimed at those clear green eyes. Wouldn't it be better if those eyes simply didn't exist? She gave her head a small shake, trying to cast away those dark thoughts. I really like this dress, Irene said softly. May I go change into another one? The attendants immediately bustled into action. Of course, this way, please. Since you've already put on a gown, trimming your hair a little might be nice too. Another attendant stepped forward holding a tray. Just a tiny trim, so your face can be seen more clearly. On the tray lay a delicate pair of golden scissors, gleaming coldly beneath the light. Irene stared at them, her breathing growing ragged, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Sensing something wrong, one attendant asked worriedly, "Oh dear, why are you sweating so suddenly? Are you all right? Do you feel unwell?" Mississippi, Diego's voice rang out in the spacious hall. He walked over to Irene and extended both hands, firmly holding her trembling ones. "It's all right. Breathe slowly. Relax." Irene gradually calmed down. "Thank you, Mr. Diego." Irene spoke somewhat hurriedly. "I startled you just now because of me, didn't I?" Leaning back in the chair, Diego waved a hand casually. "This kind of thing is common on the battlefield. Don't worry, I wasn't startled at all." Lifting his teacup, he added in an easy tone, "Though this is the first time I've learned you're afraid of scissors." Irene lowered her head in silence and said nothing. Sensing the atmosphere grow heavy, Diego stopped what he was doing. "Miss Bang." Suddenly, he pulled out an adorable cat mask and put it over his own face. Irene looked at him in surprise. "Where did you pull that from?" Diego answered smugly, "There's always a way." Taking the mask from him, Irene couldn't help laughing. The gloom from moments earlier vanished without a trace. Resting his chin on one hand, Diego's eyes grew gentle and profound. "Can I ask what happened?" Irene's smile gradually faded. "Scissors almost stabbed my eye once," Irene explained softly. "When I was little and playing alone. Mr. Diego probably isn't afraid of anything, right? After all, you're such a strong soldier." Diego pondered for a moment. "Soldiers are still human. How could we have nothing to fear?" "Of course we do," Irene asked, a little surprised. "Really?" Diego looked up at the sunlight outside the window and said, "Of course. What I used to fear most was losing battles." "Losing battles?" Diego nodded. "Yes. We fought desperately to prepare for war and devised every kind of strategy, but no matter how much effort we put in, sometimes it still didn't work." He sank into memory. Defeat after defeat, comrades dying one after another. At times like that, the frustration was suffocating. Diego knelt painfully in a pool of blood, clutching his hair tightly, his face twisted. With despair, that period was truly very hard for me. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing dense tattoos along his wrist. At times when I simply couldn't endure it, I started adding these things one by one. Piercings, tattoos, I suppose. That was a kind of self-harm, too. As Irene listened, her eyes slowly grew wet. "Mr. Diego." Diego snapped back to himself, and when he saw that Irene looked ready to cry, he panicked. He hurriedly waved his hands and comforted her. "Hey, it's all right now, really. That's all in the past, so that's why I can talk about it so calmly." Irene looked at him with reddened eyes. "Then how did you get better?" Diego froze slightly, then showed a relieved smile. "I think it was because I realized I wasn't alone. Whenever I felt like I couldn't go on, I'd go find my comrades and complain, 'When are we ever going to win?' Then everyone would gather together to come up with a plan. Grand Duke Cesare would even joke around sometimes, saying things like if we didn't win next time, he'd give up his knightly title. And after that, Cesare always led us to victory. His Grace the Grand Duke always brought back victory." Resting his chin in his hand, Diego said with a smile, "Thanks to that, I really did get much better. Irene, listen quietly, knowing you're not alone. Irene, come here." Irene drew back her gaze. "Mr. Diego, I want to change too. Even if I can't do it right away, I want to overcome it little by little so that I won't feel ashamed standing beside Grand Duke Cesare." "Sir Diego, please wait." But His Grace the Grand Duke is very busy, and for something like a fear of scissors, asking him to stay by her side seems a bit. Diego pushed Irene forward. "Miss, but this really is the best way. When you're trying to overcome fear, having the person closest to you by your side is the most effective method. That much I know better than anyone." Irene stood stunned. "Diego, sir, someone else." A figure slowly approached. "Hey, should I just take a sleeping pill?" "There's a very strong one in the laboratory." Diego hurriedly reminded him. "Ah, miss, Irene. Cesari's voice suddenly came from behind. Sleeping pills? He asked coldly. Lowering her head, Irene sat on the sofa, her voice as soft as a mosquito's hum. I'm sorry, Your Grace. I troubled you over something so trivial. Cesare sat beside her and replied in an even tone, Don't worry about that. Tilting his head slightly, he asked, Do you want me to hold your hand? Irene jerked in surprise and waved her hands in flustered refusal. And no, as long as you're beside me. That's enough. She lowered her head, her cheeks flushing red, and fell silent. But if you held it, perhaps it would work even better. A faint smile appeared on Cesari's lips. He reached out and gently placed his hand over the back of Irene's. Then his slender fingers slowly curled around hers, tightly enclosing her hand in his palm. Irene stared blankly at their clasped hands and let out a soft breath. Oh, looking at the man beside her, her heartbeat involuntarily quickened. The rattle of cart wheels broke the silence. Sonio slowly entered, pushing an elegant cart. Irene looked at him in surprise. Ah, Mr. Sonio. Sonio bowed slightly. After stopping the cart, he picked up a pair of silver scissors from it. These old hands of mine are still steady enough. If I'm the one to tidy you up, perhaps you'll feel more at ease. Irene looked at the scissors, and her body tensed instinctively. Cesare noticed her unease. Irene, close your eyes. I'll stay here with you the whole time. Meeting Cesari's steady gaze, Irene took a deep breath and slowly closed her eyes. She removed her glasses and placed them on the table. The soft snipping of the scissors rose and fell by her ears, and strands of hair slid down along her cheeks. Sonio stopped moving. It's done. He picked up an elegant hand mirror and held it out before Irene. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at herself in the mirror. Parting her lips, she let out a small gasp. Sonio asked softly, What do you think? To me, it looks quite perfect, but Irene lowered the mirror. I like it very much too. Thank you, Mr. Sonio. Cesare sat nearby, silently watching everything. Irene turned to him and continued, Your Grace must be very busy. Thank you so much for making time to stay with me. Lowering her eyes, Irene murmured thoughtfully, I never imagined Mr. Sonio would help trim my hair. It all feels rather unbelievable. Suddenly, Cesare called Irene. Reaching out, he took the mirror steadily from her hand. Holding it up, Cesare asked, What do you see? Irene looked into the mirror and fell into a long silence. Cesare continued, Is there something in the mirror you don't want to see? Irene lowered her head and gripped her skirt tightly with both hands. In a low voice, she confessed, Actually, even when I look in a mirror, I can't see my own face clearly. It's all pitch black, like a monster that's been smeared over. My eyes don't hurt. I try to study why this happens. Based on what I've learned, it's probably psychological or emotional. Cesare reached out and lightly brushed his fingertips over Irene's cheek, sweeping away the stray hair by her ear. Do you dislike my hairstyle now? And without glasses, my eyes look strange, don't they? Cesare called softly, Irene, have I ever once told you that you were strange? Irene was silent for a long moment. No. Is it because of Baron Elrod? Irene, your mother is not your entire world. Cesare lowered his eyes and murmured as if in self-reproach. I should have resolved it. I knew that myself. Irene asked in confusion what. He reached out and gently rubbed her hair. It's nothing. Forget it. It's time to go home, Irene. Irene stared at him blankly, still not recovered from the emotions of moments before. Cesare looked at Irene, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. Tonight? You can stay here again. Irene's face instantly flushed scarlet, and the sound of her heartbeat seemed perfectly audible in the quiet room. In a low voice, Cesare said, I told you before you could stay the night. Irene quickly refused. No, because of me, you've already lost too much time, so I really should go home now. She hurriedly avoided his gaze. But Lord Cesare, are you planning to come with me? Otherwise, were you planning to go back alone? Irene stammered in reply. Igriagis. Cesare started the car, and the sound of the engine hummed low in the night. Looking ahead, he said, It's this late. As her husband, it's only natural that I take you home. The two of them came beneath a tree laden with fruit. Looking at its lush branches, Cesare said with a sigh, Nothing here has changed at all. Irene replied, How could it not have changed? It's grown a great deal. It's been almost 10 years since you gave it to me. Cesare lowered his head and asked Irene, Do you remember why I gave it to you? Cesare bent down and asked young Irene, Irene, why did you follow a stranger? Irene twisted her fingers nervously and answered in a small voice. I heard there was a kind of medicine that tasted like oranges. Cesare listened in silence, a trace of helplessness in his eyes. Irene lowered her head in a panic and apologized. I'm sorry, Your Grace. Looking at her like that, Cesare couldn't help laughing. Even if I wanted to forget, I probably couldn't. Irene blushed in embarrassment. Cesare turned around and said, Anyway, I'm hungry. Irene froze for a moment and gave a little cry. Irene hurriedly said, Then you should go home quickly. Thank you for bringing me back. Cesare stopped walking. His leather boots made a faint sound against the grass. Irene, Cesare leaned down close to her, staring into her eyes as he repeated, I said I'm hungry. Irene's face instantly turned red, and her heartbeat began racing uncontrollably. Flustered, she waved her hands. No, Lord Cesare, please. Irene clutched at her apron and pleaded loudly. Please let me do it. In the kitchen, Cesare had already taken off his coat and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. He was holding a knife and slicing bread with practiced ease. Irene stood behind him watching, unable to sit still. To think Lord Cesare is cutting bread himself. This is simply... Irene stared blankly at Cesare as he skillfully handled the ingredients, his movements neat and natural. Unable to help herself, she murmured, You're really good at this. Every angle is flawless. If only His Grace could help me like this when I'm studying medicinal ingredients. The corners of Cesare's lips lifted into a faint smile. The kitchen filled with the steady sounds of chopping. Plates were stacked neatly to one side. Cesare worked with his head lowered, looking unusually gentle. Irene quietly watched his back, ripples stirring in her heart. Once upon a time, I dreamed of a life like this. Simple and peaceful. Irene lowered her eyes, a trace of bitterness in her heart. But now that I've agreed to become the Grand Duchess, that ordinary dream can never come true again. That kind of life doesn't belong here. I'll be moving farther and farther away from everything ordinary and warm. Cesare's voice interrupted her thoughts. Irene came back to herself and saw Cesare holding out a freshly made sandwich. Try it. Taking the food, Irene was a little overwhelmed. Thank you. She took a small bite of the sandwich and chewed carefully. Cesare stood beside her, quietly watching. Is there something on my face? Cesare replied, No, nothing. He lowered his head slightly, his gaze fixed tightly on Irene's face. I just want to look at your eyes a little longer like this. Irene parted her lips in surprise, the sandwich in her hand pausing by her mouth. Looking completely at a loss, she let out a soft gasp. Cesare continued, If I'd known that was the reason, I would have taken them off sooner. Irene's eyes widened abruptly, and she froze where she stood. Taken what off? Her face turned scarlet in an instant, countless chaotic thoughts flashing through her mind. Seeing her alarmed, embarrassed look, Cesare explained helplessly, What are you thinking? I mean your glasses. Irene froze, then let out a long, awkward sigh. That. Lord Cesare, if you like, I'll appear before you like this from now on. I don't look quite so gloomy this way. Cesare gave a soft laugh. Irene hurriedly changed the subject. Anyway, Lord Cesare, you should try some too. It's really delicious. Cesare looked at the food she held out, but did not reach for it. Instead, he took hold of Irene's wrist. Lowering his head slightly, he lightly licked the sauce that had gotten on her fingertip with the tip of his tongue. Irene's eyes flew wide open, her breathing stopping at once as she froze where she stood. Cesare released her hand, his fingertip brushing lightly over his lips. Yes, it does taste good. In no way have I turned into some kind of pervert. Irene lifted a pink rabbit doll and showed it to Cesare excitedly. Want to see this? It was a gift from Sir Diego. A rabbit doll. Hugging the doll, she let out a dry laugh. But inside, she felt a strange awkwardness. How did this turn out like this? Are we touring my room or something? Cesare looked around Irene's bedroom. Lowering her head to the rabbit in her arms, Irene muttered softly, I thought I'd already grown past the age of liking dolls, but the more I look at it, the cuter it seems. In Sir Diego's eyes, am I still a child? Every time he comes back from a trip, he buys me another doll. Cesare stepped to the window and brushed his fingers lightly over the leaves of a potted plant. It's all the same. Everything here, even the air carrying your scent, is exactly as it was before. Following behind him, Irene said somewhat hurriedly, the last time you saw my room, I was still very young. A lot has changed since then. Cesare stopped in front of the bookshelf, his fingers passing over rows of books. There are still a lot of books. Irene's eyes widened suddenly when Cesari's fingers stopped on a thick notebook. That's my diary. She cried out and rushed forward. Your Grace. Her foot slipped and the rabbit doll fell from her arms. That. Maybe. Irene squeezed her eyes shut and shouted. Would you like to brush your teeth with me? From the bathroom came the soft sounds of brushing. The two stood side by side before the mirror, brushing in silence. Irene moved her toothbrush mechanically. I must be insane. I actually invited him to brush our teeth together without thinking. Cesare rinsed his mouth and let out a low sigh. Very refreshing. Irene stopped mid-motion and looked at him in surprise. Really? I made this myself by mixing several herbs into some tooth powder I bought on the market. The more she spoke, the more excited she became, unconsciously leaning closer. Considering the ingredients, I think the effect should be extremely good. Looking down at her, Cesare pointed to the toiletries nearby and asked, Did you make this soap too? Irene nodded repeatedly. Yes. Would you like to try it? Cesare rolled up his sleeves by the sink and began rubbing the soap between his hands. Irene watched from the side intently. With his head lowered, fine lather covered his broad palms. He carefully rubbed between his fingers and over the backs of his hands, his expression focused and solemn. Irene gazed at Cesari's profile, ripples stirring in her heart. His Grace the Grand Duke. He's even this serious about washing his hands. Outside the window, the setting sun had already sunk below the horizon. Irene suddenly came back to herself. It's gotten so late already. Stopping in a fluster, she said sorry. This isn't the time to be talking about soap. Shouldn't you be going now? Cesare did not answer immediately. He picked up a towel and slowly dried the water from his hands. Irene, suddenly he bent down, his tall figure completely enveloping her. Warm breath brushed past her ear as Cesare said in a lowered voice, From now on, no matter who says they want to see your bedroom, don't agree. Irene froze, her cheeks turning burning hot. Water droplets slid down the counter with crisp little sounds. Irene took a deep breath and answered softly, Other than you, no one else has ever entered my bedroom, Lord Cesare. So, you don't need to worry. Looking down at Irene, Cesari's voice turned low. And dangerous. Then are you not worried about what I might do? Irene folded her hands before her, her fingertips trembling faintly. She looked up at him. Lord Cesare, you would never hurt me. Even if, by some chance, Lord Cesare really did hurt me, even killed me. That would only mean I had done something wrong. Cesare called her name in a low voice. Irene. Irene's eyes widened in shock, her breath catching in her throat. Then is this also because you did something wrong? Without giving her any choice, he kissed her. Fierce and commanding, he claimed Irene's lips. Irene's fingers clenched tightly around the edge of the table. Wait. Cesare loosened his lips slightly. Irene hurriedly tried to explain. That's not what I meant. This isn't because I did anything wrong. Cesare gave her no chance to continue and bent down to kiss her again. She slowly closed her eyes, finally wrapping her arms around him. Her fingertips sank into the black hair at the back of his head, awkwardly, yet fervently returning the kiss. Their breathing grew heavier and heavier. He kissed down along the side of Irene's neck, leaving scattered red marks on her pale skin. Irene, Sinon pushed open the heavy doors and strode quickly into the splendid hall. Miss Irene, she looked around, and her expectant expression instantly froze, replaced by disappointment and confusion. Has she already left? Diego, sitting leisurely in an armchair by the window and smoking, said. She looked around. The expectant expression on her face froze instantly, replaced by a trace of disappointment and confusion. Has she already left? Diego, sitting leisurely in the armchair by the window, was smoking. You're always so late. You're always late. She left a long time ago. Lowering her gaze, Sinon said regretfully, That's such a shame. You said the young lady had her hair done and even took off her glasses. Her eyesight isn't actually bad, and yet she's always worn those glasses. As for why that lady keeps hiding her appearance, it truly is puzzling. We once thought it was to guard against kidnapping, didn't we? But that's not the case at all. Sinon stopped moving. Diego slowly exhaled a stream of smoke, his gaze turning deep and cold. The late Baroness Elrod. She was far crazier than we imagined. 6 years ago, I said this couldn't go on. The Baron himself was already a hopeless waste. Diego walked along the stone path in the courtyard, saying heavily, putting him aside. You must have noticed it too. The Baroness's words and actions were growing stranger by the day. Michel said quietly, yes, whether out of jealousy or something else. The more His Highness cherished Miss Irene, the more everything began to go wrong. Sinon turned her head slightly, her expression cold. I also thought the Baron and Baroness were incapable of being proper parents to Miss Irene. Perhaps we should consider letting another noble family adopt her. Walking at the front, Cesare stopped. If we forcibly take her away, Irene will break down as well. She isn't the sort of child who could easily abandon her family. Rotan immediately stopped, lowered his head respectfully, and answered, yes, Your Highness. Looking into the distance, Cesare said, go investigate those universities that have dormitories. She has talent in academics. It would be better to find a place where she could devote herself more deeply to her studies. And yet, 2 years later, she came back before even graduating, didn't she? Sitting in the dim room, Sinon replied, yes. That was because the Baron squandered all the family property. With her grades, even a professorship would not have been out of reach. Diego suddenly clenched his fist. Even back then, I could already sense they were tormenting her in every possible way, but I never imagined. There was physical abuse as well. And when she was little, she was even thinner and weaker than she is now, barely more than a tiny little thing. Outside the window, the night grew deeper and the wind rustled through the treetops. Sinon leaned against the back of the sofa and fell into a long silence. Lowering her eyes, she seemed to be weighing her next words. As for Grand Duke Cesare, don't you think it's been hard lately to tell what he's thinking? Diego raised his head slightly. In what sense? Sinon grew a little impatient. Oh, like last time. Your voice is too loud. The sound of measured footsteps came from the end of the corridor. Carrying his coat in one hand, Cesare walked into the room with a cold expression and said, if you have something to say, I've told you before, just say it. Go on. Cesare exhaled a puff of smoke. Tell me what exactly you're curious about. Sinon was silent for a moment. Diego looked at her somewhat uneasily. I don't understand. I don't understand why you keep pushing Miss Irene into the spotlight. In broad daylight, during the parade, you publicly gave her flowers. Then immediately afterward, you announced the engagement. You even didn't stop her from coming into contact with Princess Pavarini. All of this looks as though you're deliberately exposing Miss Irene to the public over and over again. Cesare pressed the nearly burnt-out cigarette into the ashtray. Many things have already changed. I'm simply rearranging the board to respond to those changes. In order to quickly and accurately identify the people who would hurt Irene, this is the best method. Sinon frowned, disapproval in her voice. If that's the case, then even if it took longer, there should be a safer, gentler way. Cesare gave a low laugh. Another way? And what would that be? Put shackles on Irene's ankles and lock her deep inside the Grand Duke's estate so that she never sees anyone? Or send everyone who angers me to the guillotine and cut off their heads? He turned his face slightly. His dark red eyes glimmered in the shadows with a chilling light. Honestly, I prefer the latter. If it were up to me, I wouldn't even need a guillotine. I'd rush into the streets and slaughter everything in sight. Those bastards who threw stones at my child. Those beasts who stole her corpse and insulted it at will. Every last one of them deserves to die. They said those people even hung the severed head in a tavern so drunks could stare and mock it. Later, there were even lines of people waiting to do such insane things. And I still have to let those bastards live in this world. Sinon and Diego exchanged a look, their eyes full of shock. Your Highness, what exactly are you talking about? Standing before the window, Cesari's back looked lonely and repressed. But if I act exactly as I wish, Irene will break. Because she wants me to be an outstanding, upright Grand Duke. The night wind swept through the courtyard, and the shadows of the trees swayed in the moonlight. Cesare turned to look at Sinon. So Sinon, the corners of his mouth lifted into a smile, both complicated and dangerous. Even if it makes her a little unhappy now, isn't this method better for the Irene of the present? A grand wedding was being held inside the mansion. Guests moved through the splendidly decorated venue, quietly discussing this unusual ceremony. At first, I thought it was strange to hold the wedding inside the residence. but this place is simply beautiful. If heaven really exists, it must look something like this. Several noble ladies gathered together, exchanging rumors. I heard the bride is the daughter of a baron's family, but that family name sounds unfamiliar. Just how beautiful can she be? One of them lowered her voice. My uncle said there's no woman uglier than her in this world. Another asked in astonishment, ugly? Then why on earth is His Highness marrying her? Before the words had even fully left her mouth, a hand adorned with extravagant jewelry struck the table sharply with a crisp sound. Quiet down. The noble women jumped in fright, their expressions instantly turning tense. Why, Your Highness, Princess? Ornella swept her gaze across them and said, You are being terribly rude. To gossip like this at a wedding. Have you no manners at all? I've heard that the lady who is about to become the Grand Duchess shares a very special bond with His Highness. They say she is the daughter of His Highness's late nurse. Even if her status or appearance has been questioned, her character has never been doubted. I've seen her myself a few times. Even while living in poverty, she displayed astonishing resilience. The guests nearby all pricked up their ears to listen. Ornella continued, She even once came to me and asked whether I could give her a chance to serve as my maid. A noble lady beside her asked in surprise, Your maid, Your Highness? Ornella gently shook her head. Since she is about to join the royal family, I told her that would not be appropriate. My inability to help her with that has weighed heavily on my heart ever since. One of the ladies sighed thoughtfully. Oh my. Then could the reason for this marriage be pity? Or perhaps some sense of responsibility? Covering her lips with her fan, Ornella revealed a meaningful smile. That is merely a feeling I have. Turning her face to the side, Ornella let her gaze pass through the ornate garden, falling upon the two figures speaking in the distance. Of course, it does not look like love. At the other end of the house, a maid walked up to Irene and softly reminded her, Miss Irene, it's time to go downstairs. Irene sat before the mirror, allowing the maids to arrange her white veil. Through the thin gauze, she looked out the window, a faint nervousness hidden in her expression. Sir Rotan. Rotan bowed slightly and answered steadily, Yes. Princess Ornella von Paverini. She came to attend the ceremony too, didn't she? Rotan respectfully replied from the side, Yes. It has been confirmed that she has already taken her seat. Congratulations on your wedding. Irene lowered her head, bitterness filling her heart. She must look beautiful today too. All the guests are probably laughing at me, wondering whether the bride was swapped out. I could tell just from their expressions earlier. Irene, have I ever told you how difficult they are? I only ever wanted to look at your eyes like this. Standing not far away, Rotan softly called, Miss Irene. Irene slowly raised her head. Let's go. His Highness is already waiting. White lilies bloomed quietly beneath the sunlight, and the wedding venue was filled with their fragrance. In the distant garden, several officers were gathered together in low conversation. All three looked at Irene with agitation. Irene stepped forward, her high heels striking the stone path in a crisp rhythm. The long, elegant voices of cello and violin intertwined and echoed through the flower-filled venue. However, as the bride's figure appeared at the head of the red carpet, the smooth melody came to an abrupt halt. The musician froze, suspended in midair, staring ahead in shock. A noisy stir broke out among the seated guests. Irene clutched the bouquet in her arms tightly. It's all right. Over and over in her heart, she repeated, It's all right. The warped shadows around her and those scrutinizing gazes came surging in like a tide, surrounding her completely. She could feel countless eyes fixed on her. Of course, she had already expected such stares. Endure it a little longer. Just a little longer. Irene, Cesari's voice suddenly rang out. Cesare stood before her. You should be looking at me. The person who, from a certain moment onward, gave meaning to my existence, who watched over all of my growth and gave me a love even my parents could not. That world that once seemed so lofty, as if it could never be reached, was now quietly gazing at her. As the groom of this wedding, Cesare reached out. He gazed at the bride after her veil was lifted. Reflected in his dark crimson eyes was how she looked at that moment. Meeting Cesari's gaze, Irene's lips curved into a radiant, resolute smile. Standing before the sacred altar, he made his vow in a low, solemn voice. I, Cesare Tel Elzard, as Grand Duke of the Trajan Empire, in the name of God, do swear to offer an eternal, unchanging love and the truest trust. I shall become the will that protects this new family. Cesare gazed at her, his tone growing ever firmer. For my lady, I will draw my sword without hesitation. The officiant gave a light cough. Standing beside Cesare, Irene spoke her vow softly. I, Irene Elrod, as the daughter of the house of Baron Elrod, in the name of God, do swear to offer eternal, unchanging love and the truest trust. May peace dwell in our new family like an olive tree. Irene lifted her eyes, her gaze filled with both determination and tenderness. For my knight, I will weave a laurel crown. Cesare lowered his head and met Irene's eyes. Their silhouettes overlapped as one. The officiant announced with dignity, "Next is the exchange of rings." Cesare took the ring from the red velvet cushion held out by the attendant. Irene suddenly came back to herself and looked at him in surprise. That ring, under everyone's witness, Cesare lifted Irene's hand and slowly slid the ring, symbol of their vow, onto her finger. Irene lowered her head and looked at the finger now bound by the ring, her expression tinged with shyness and emotion. Holding her hand, Cesare said, "Irene, take this ring as my answer." Irene tilted her head up slightly. Looking at Cesari's profile, she said, "Then I will stay by your side forever." The afterglow of sunset spilled across the grand manor. Irene slowly raised her hand and stared at the glittering ring on her finger. No matter how she looked at it, this ring was exactly the same as that one. It was the ring he had drawn by hand in his diary as a child. If it was just a coincidence, it was far too identical. She fell into thought. Did Cesare happen to see my diary? But when could that have been? Irene's eyes widened. No, impossible. There wasn't even time for something like that day. She looked around hurriedly, and her gaze landed on the large bed not far away. Irene swallowed nervously. Today, are we really going to do it? Do what? At some point, Cesare was already standing behind the sofa. Irene jumped in fright and shrank back. Cesare, you returned earlier than I imagined. I thought you would stay at the banquet until late. In a low voice, Cesare asked, Irene, is covering only the top enough? Irene's face instantly turned bright red. Wait a moment. Cesare didn't stop. He bent down and swept her entire body up into his arms. Irene covered her face in embarrassment. Wait. Holding her steadily, Cesare said, you should be looking at me. Covering her cheek shyly, Irene stammered, Oh, you're back. I didn't get the chance to greet you earlier. Cesare silently stared at her, unreadable emotions flickering in his dark crimson eyes. Only after a long pause did he answer softly, I'm back, Irene. Irene held her breath nervously in the silent room. The sound of her heartbeat was painfully clear. Watching Cesari's face draw closer and closer, she slowly closed her eyes. Then she suddenly sneezed, shattering the intimate stillness between them. Cesare paused. Are you cold? Irene hunched her shoulders a little. Just a little. I think it's because I touched your formal clothes just now. The decorations and buttons were a bit cold, so it was just a reflex. Cesare listened in silence, then let out a soft sigh. He raised his hand and slowly undid the buttons of his shirt. This is the first time anyone has asked me to take off my clothes. Irene's eyes widened in surprise as she watched him. In a low voice, Cesare continued, Since you asked, I suppose I should obey. His shirt slid from his shoulders, falling in folds by the bed. Looking down at Irene, Cesare wore a faint, ambiguous smile. Since it's my wife asking me, Irene cried out in a panic, Wait. Lowering his head to look at her, Cesare asked, Do you want to touch me? Irene froze where she sat. What? Me? You want me to touch you, Lord Cesare? Cesare pressed. You don't want to? Irene covered her face tightly. It's not that I don't want to. She slowly moved her hands aside and peered through the gap between her fingers. Goodness, a man's body could really be this captivating. Cesare watched her with a confident, faintly amused expression. In the silent room, Irene's heartbeat rang clearly. Her trembling hand reached out, fingertips inching closer with care. Cesare stood still and allowed that hand to touch his body. Irene gasped softly. Her fingers unconsciously curled slightly as they hovered along a prominent scar. They lingered there. Lord Cesare, it must have hurt terribly back then. I never thought, her voice thickened, that it would make me cry like this. I am sorry. Irene's voice trembled. I knew soldiers were bound to bear scars, but I didn't expect there would be so many. He reached out and gently caressed Irene's cheek. Cesare lowered his head and kissed Irene. Irene suddenly let out a startled cry, and her body tensed involuntarily. Cesare stopped and looked at her. Did it hurt? Irene breathed quickly. Just a little, Irene said softly in surprise. You suddenly bit me. Watching her, Cesare replied in a low voice. I see. If it hurts, then that's good. He bent down and drew Irene into his arms again. You'll probably never understand why I have to keep confirming that you exist. Why? If my elder brother had helped back then, she wouldn't have died. So why? Did you just stand there and watch until that child's head was cut off? Leon bowed his head deeply, his voice shaking as he replied. I'm sorry, Cesare. I truly am. Irene chose death herself for the honor of the Elzert family. The anti-royalist nobles tried to use Irene's drug research as a pretext to attack the imperial family. You know how extreme they were. Brother, do you know why I let you become emperor? Leon tore off his crown in terror. I'm sorry, Cesare. I'm truly sorry. I really wanted to protect her, because I knew how much you cherished that child. But if things continue this way, brother will also have to pay the price. Just as I, too, must pay a price. Cesare turned around. Without looking back, he walked deeper into the great hall. The dead cannot come back to life. That was the law of the world decided by God. If Irene could not return, then I would return to the past instead. He suddenly pressed the pocket watch, and the space around him began to distort. Standing at the center of an immense shadow, Cesare let the torrent of time swallow him whole, no matter what price he had to pay. Lord Cesare. Holding Irene, he clasped her hand tightly. Irene lay on her back on the bed, her eyes hazy as she looked upward. Your Highness, all of this was for you. Morning light spilled through the window into the room. On the soft bed, Irene slowly opened her eyes, her mind still drifting in the afterglow of sleep. Did you sleep well? A low voice sounded beside her ear. Irene's eyes flew open wide when she saw Cesare lying on his side beside her, his cheek resting on one hand as he watched her. My wife. Irene instantly woke up fully. Flustered, she yanked the blanket up to cover herself, her cheeks turning bright red. Gee, good morning. Did you rest well? Looking at her panic, Cesare said, Good morning. A greeting ought to be face-to-face. Standing beside the table, Sonio reported the schedule to Irene. His Grace is in the office for a brief meeting with a guest, and afterward he will attend to personal matters. Sir Michel will return to visit you later. Until then, my lady may enjoy some private time. If you feel bored, please feel free to give this old man any orders. Smiling, Irene replied, Thank you, Sonio. After bowing, Sonio left the room and gently closed the door behind him. Left alone in the quiet room, Irene picked up the newspaper on the table. Her eyes landed on a striking article. In the center of the paper was a large photograph, her and Cesare kissing at the wedding. Beneath, it was the bold headline, The Grand Duke and Grand Duchess of Elzert are born. The Tyrant Empire's founding myth come to life. Irene stared at the words in the paper and read softly. The Grand Duke and Grand Duchess of Elzert, with beauty beyond imagination, captivated every guest. She set the paper down and let out a deep sigh. I really did marry his grace. My research is important, but my position is no longer what it used to be. I have to become a Grand Duchess who won't embarrass him. Closing her eyes, Irene made a silent vow. I absolutely cannot become a burden to him. Her gaze moved to another corner of the paper, where an article about Count Domenico was printed. As the new Speaker of the Assembly, he was said to be heralding change in Trajan's parliament. Domenico's attempt to mediate between the imperial family and the nobility had caused no small stir. Domenico suddenly shoved open the office door. Your Grace, since when did you become so interested in politics? You send something like this to me, the Speaker of the Assembly. What exactly are you plotting? Cesare sat behind his desk, writing something. You confirmed the contents, didn't you, Domenico? Gritting his teeth, Domenico replied. That's exactly why I rushed here. I checked them. He waved the paper in his hand, his voice trembling with agitation. No matter how grave the crime committed by the son-in-law of Marquis Minikin, how could you resolve it in such a cruel way? Was sending him to the guillotine not enough? You even forced Marquis Minikin to gouge out his own eyes. Domenico pressed a hand to his forehead in pain. You should know better than anyone how difficult reconciliation between the nobility and the imperial family already is. You may as well just kill them all. If you executed every noble, maybe then you'd get what you want. The tip of Cesari's pen paused. Ink bled across the page. In a quiet voice he answered, perhaps. Even if I kill them all, I still wouldn't get what I want. Domenico froze. A chill crept up his spine. Cesare suddenly let the smile vanish from his face. Then his tone lightened. Just a joke. Rotan, take him out. Rotan held out a document to Domenico. This is. It was a record of his collusion with the Kingdom of Calvin while Cesare had been away at war. Domenico took the file with trembling hands. Then Cesari's voice echoed by his ear. To cure your beloved wife's illness, you became a spy for an enemy nation. I never imagined that a count who once prided himself on standing by his convictions would do such a thing. Even seeing it with my own eyes, I still find it hard to believe. Domenico's breathing grew ragged, cold sweat sliding down his face. He dropped to his knees before Cesare. I stopped very quickly. No matter how badly you wanted to save your wife, you framed the young woman the Grand Duke treasured and pushed her step by step toward the abyss of execution. Kneeling on the floor, Domenico trembled violently. I just couldn't do it. That one thing I truly couldn't do. Heavy footsteps echoed through the room. Cesare stopped before Domenico and looked down at him from above. What makes you think I should spare someone who nearly harmed the Grand Duchess? Domenico collapsed back onto the floor, panting. Are you asking for my cooperation? A smile curved Cesari's lips, and he nodded. Squatting down to meet Domenico's eyes, he said, the Grand Duchess will soon reveal a new medicine. It is a remarkable drug, and I have great hopes for it as well. However, there is a small problem for now. Domenico asked tensely. A small problem? Cesare placed a hand on Domenico's shoulder. Compared to its efficacy, that problem is nothing. So, as Speaker of the Assembly, why don't you protect the Grand Duchess for us? As a dog of the House of Elzard, His Grace has already granted permission to establish a laboratory, though the new one will most likely be built inside the Grand Duke's residence. As he moved heavy crates, Michel said, we're planning to have the servants carry all the equipment, but the important items should be watched over by you personally. It's a shame we can't use this place anymore. But I'm still happy to begin my research again. Michel stopped what he was doing and asked, are you really that happy? Smiling, Irene replied, of course. There's still so much research left unfinished, and it's meaningful work. There came a knock from outside. Apothecary, are you in there? Irene turned toward the door. The door opened, and a black leather shoe stepped inside. Domenico entered carrying a bundle of documents. The moment he saw who was inside, his mouth fell open in terror, cold sweat running down his face. Grand Duchess. Domenico stared at her in disbelief. Ow! Why is the Grand Duchess here? Several months earlier, seated at a table and looking at the teacup before him, Domenico had said, my wife has suffered from illness for several years. At first it was only a political marriage, but now, I can't easily let her go. This is the medicine she has been taking all this time, but lately it stopped working. Her condition seems to be worsening, so I came to you. Could you examine it and make something similar? Irene accepted the bottle and carefully examined the liquid inside. A narcotic painkiller. If she has to take something this strong, then both the patient and her caretaker must have had a very hard time. After a moment of silence, Irene said, as an apothecary, I can't lie, so I'll tell you honestly. Even if she takes medicine compounded by me, she won't be cured. But at the very least, I can make your wife more comfortable. Domenico clenched his fists tightly. If my wife can feel even a little better, that is enough for me. Covering his face, tears slipped through his fingers. Truly, I am truly grateful. Back in the present, Domenico stood in the doorway, sweat gathering on his forehead. He asked cautiously, could it be? Grand Duchess, are you here to see the apothecary as well? What should I do? Count Domenico is the new Speaker of the Senate. If anyone finds out the Grand Duchess is selling medicine in a shabby place like this, it could cause trouble for His Grace. Irene clutched the fabric over her chest, her heart pounding violently. Domenico continued, the apothecary's whereabouts have been unknown lately, so I've been worried. My wife's medicine is almost gone. Where on earth did he go? There's still some medicine left, so you don't need to worry. Domenico froze. What? Irene's fingers trembled slightly as she gripped her skirt. Taking a deep breath, Irene said, I am that apothecary. Count Domenico stood there in stunned silence. What? Irene quickly took a pair of rough-lensed glasses from her bosom and put them on. Domenico's eyes widened even further. Avoiding his gaze, Irene said, Did you come for medicine today? I can prepare it for you right away. Domenico waved his hands in a panic. And no, it's not that. I just happen to have business nearby today, so I came by to express my thanks. He pressed his lips together tightly, his expression turning complicated and grave. The papers in Domenico's hand slipped to the floor. He suddenly bent low and gave a deep bow. Please forgive my rudeness. Irene was startled by the sudden gesture and instinctively tried to kneel in return, but Michelle immediately steadied her shoulder and whispered, My lady, you mustn't kneel so casually. Irene came to herself at once and replied in confusion, You do not need to apologize to me, my lady. The Grand Duchess I once personally helped harm under Calvin's orders turns out to be my benefactor, Domenico suddenly sued, nearly losing his footing. Irene looked at him worriedly. Are you all right, Count Domenico? Are you feeling dizzy? Lowering his head, Domenico let out a heavy sigh. I think I have no choice but to become a dog. Irene stood frozen, repeating in surprise, A dog? Domenico answered firmly, Yes. To become the Grand Duchess's dog. Doesn't sound so bad. He dropped to his knees before Irene and looked up at her, his face carrying an almost liberated smile. It might even be rather pleasant. Irene looked utterly at a loss. What? And no. Count, please stand up. Just then, a low voice came from the doorway. If you do not like old dogs, shall I find you a puppy instead? Your Grace. At some point, Cesare was already standing by the door, his arms crossed over his chest, coldly observing everything in the room. At the sound of his voice, Domenico's body jolted, and cold sweat poured down at once. Yes, my lady. Cesare walked straight to Irene's side and drew her into his arms. Have you been waiting long for your husband? I'm surprised you came today. Holding several heavy books, Irene said, I heard you were extremely busy, so I thought I'd only get to see you before bed. Entering the room, Cesare looked at Irene as she tidied the desk. Irene continued, I really didn't imagine you'd come all the way here. Cesare stopped and called softly, Irene. Cesare held out a pot of blooming red flowers to her. Continue your research. Then he added, I will provide everything you need for it. Accepting help from Sonio isn't a bad idea either. Irene silently accepted the flower pot. Then what about the matter of the executions? And if this is discovered, if it came out that the Grand Duchess, and not just an ordinary apothecary, had been involved in the drug trade, it would undoubtedly damage your Grace's reputation too. No one can send the Grand Duchess to the guillotine. Cesare lowered his eyes and looked at her. And if you're truly that concerned for my reputation, then make this research succeed. Hugging the flower pot tightly, Irene's eyes began to shine. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Straightening up, Irene's expression grew firm. I will definitely succeed. Cesaris. This will be completely different from all the painkillers currently on the market. Hugging the heavy books, Irene explained excitedly to Cesare, it can directly suppress the secretion of neurotransmitters, so its efficacy is assured. Of course, we must be careful to avoid resistance. As she spoke, her hand suddenly stopped in front of the bookshelf. I accepted his Grace's kindness so easily again. If only there was some way I could repay him. Then suddenly, a thought flashed across Irene's mind, and her eyes widened as she remembered something. You were cut by a blade earlier, weren't you? Oh no, was it deep? May I see it? She turned and went to a nearby cabinet, pulling open a drawer. Standing before Cesare, Irene said, Please let me see your palm. Looking somewhat puzzled, Cesare raised both hands and showed her his palms, still covered in white gloves. Irene froze for a moment, then hurriedly explained, No, I mean your real palm. Looking at her, Cesare gave a quiet laugh. You want me to take them off? Irene nodded hard. Yes, please take them off. Lowering his head with a low chuckle, Cesare caught the leather at the fingertip with his teeth and slowly pulled. My wife is always telling me to take things off. I'll only take them off in front of you, Irene. Irene waved her hands frantically. I mean the gloves. And no, if you say it like that, anyone would misunderstand. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Irene said, Anyway, she opened an elegant black medicine case and dipped her fingertip into a little ointment. The injury you had before, I thought it would definitely leave a scar. No matter how much time passes, wounds made by blades are hard to heal. The scar treatment I developed is very effective. Irene's words abruptly stopped. She stared at Cesari's bare palm, her eyes full of confusion. His other hand, too. What is this? Why? A sense of discord, a vague suspicion, piled up layer by layer in Irene's heart. Then, a purely instinctive intuition swept over her. There were no scars here, not even the slightest trace that he had ever been wounded. Cesare lowered his eyes, his dark crimson gaze resting on Irene before him. At that moment, she realized something about the man in front of her was wrong. Cesare, I have to ask clearly, how did you know about the wedding ring I drew in my diary? The corners of Cesari's lips lifted slightly into a meaningful smile. Stretching out his hand, he asked in return, weren't you curious about the wound? Irene shook her head lightly. I'm curious about this too. I can't explain it properly right now, but it feels strange. I have a feeling these two things share the same cause. Cesare spoke slowly. I read your diary. It was written very cutely. Irene's eyes widened in disbelief, but then she shook her head and said, if you take into account when I came to your residence and when the wedding was held, you had no time to read it. The scars on my hands are merely the price I paid, just as the price you paid to escape execution was becoming the Grand Duchess. Irene looked lost and uneasy. What? I still don't really understand. Could you explain it in more detail? Cesare was silent for a moment, then answered briefly, no, not now. Cesare still didn't want me to know anything. Not before, and not now either. Cesare pulled Irene into his arms. If there is something that will make you cry, I want to postpone that moment as much as possible. Leaning against Cesare and letting him kiss her, Irene thought, things will probably go on like this forever. Even after becoming Grand Duchess, I still can't be of any help to Cesare. That sharp sense of reality made it hard for her to breathe. The founding emperor of the Tyrant Empire had once been an abandoned prince. He grew up on the steppes, drinking lion's milk, and swore he would build a nation of his own. God bestowed a blessing, welcomed the birth of a thriving kingdom, and granted him a one-horned lion. That lion later became the symbol of the Tyrant Empire. The emperor conquered the entire continent without pause. Then one day, he fell deeply in love with a woman. He desperately wished to make her his empress. But God sent down a warning. Emperor, if you wish to make this blessing your empress, you must wait 7 years. The young emperor defied God's decree. Unable to endure the long wait, he held a magnificent wedding immediately. And after the two were joined in marriage, tragedy struck. On the first morning after their wedding, the empress coughed up blood without end and died in the emperor's arms. I will offer this blessing you gave me as a sacrifice. Kneeling before God, the emperor let blood run down. The cold metal. Please, give my woman back to me. The emperor's eyes turned cold and resolute. If you do not answer my plea, I will lead all the humans you love into ruin. On the 7th night, God finally answered the emperor. The divine decree descended once more with irresistible majesty. God's voice echoed through the void. If you can endure 7 trials, I will bring her back to life. And so, over 7 years, the founding emperor overcame 7 hardships. Legend says he ultimately resurrected the empress, and the two lived happily ever after. Looking down at her teacup, Irene saw her melancholy face reflected in it. I remember reading this story in a book when I was little. It's because of this founding myth that the bride only takes her husband's surname on the 7th day after the wedding, right? Standing by the window, Sonio nodded with a faint smile. Yes, that is indeed so. Therefore, my lady will enter the imperial palace in a few days. Then you will officially receive the Elzert name. Irene lowered her eyes. Officially receive it. Irene had once cautiously asked Cesare, could you explain it to me in more detail? Cesare had merely turned his head slightly and refused coldly. No. Returning from her thoughts, Irene called softly, Sonio. Sonio immediately stepped forward with a smile. Yes, my lady. Holding her teacup, Irene asked quietly, is there anything I should be doing as the official Grand Duchess? After thinking for a moment, Sonio replied, Do you mean duties related to the Grand Duchy? Straightening his back, he continued, at present, I handle most of the estate's basic affairs, until the Grand Duchess's laboratory is completed. Sonio noticed Irene's silence. My lady, In a soft voice, Irene said, I want to become someone useful to the Grand Duchy. I can't just sit idly by doing nothing forever. At the very least, I want to be of help to His Grace. In a soft voice, she said, I want to become someone useful to the Grand Duchy. I can't just sit around doing nothing forever. At the very least, I hope I can be of help to His Grace. Hearing that, Sonio looked deeply moved. Raising a hand to his chest, he murmured, Truly, this old man has been short-sighted. I never realized my lady had been thinking about these things all this time. After steadying himself, he smiled and suggested, As it happens, I am sorting through some important letters addressed to you. Would you like to look through them first? Your private office has already been prepared as well. We can have the letters sent there for you to review at your leisure. At last, a bright smile appeared on Irene's face. All right. Seeing Irene regain her vitality, Sonio smiled in relief. Irene stood up. Then I'll go and take a look right away. She entered the office, sat before the wide desk, and fell into thought. Several letters were stacked on the desk. One of them, bearing a luxurious seal, was particularly eye-catching. My heartfelt congratulations on your marriage. Our family is planning to host a tea party soon. As your first social appearance after becoming Grand Duchess, would this not be the perfect occasion? Onella von Paverini. Looking at the invitation in her hand, Irene asked, What do you think? Standing by the desk, Sonio replied, Your own thoughts matter most, my lady. Irene lowered her gaze to the letter and remained silent for a long time. Given the influence of the ducal Paverini family, it was certainly not something she could dismiss lightly. But do I really need to choose Ornella for my social debut? Consider my position as Grand Duchess. If I simply let myself be led around by the nose, that doesn't feel right. Irene tapped her fingers lightly against the desk, producing a crisp sound. Sonio, let's do this instead. Night fell, and the Grand Duke's residence looked solemn and tranquil under the moonlight. As expected of her. Looking at the reply in her hand, Ornella said, She refused my invitation and says she'll host the tea party herself. After getting married, she's grown a great deal bolder, hasn't she? So that means she plans to gather all those underlings to display her status. Asev gracefully lifted his teacup. I didn't expect she'd know how to restrain you like this. Impressive. Ornella whipped around, suppressed anger in her voice. I've told you many times. I must marry the Grand Duke of Elzard. Look at how arrogant that insignificant girl has become now. Asev set down his cup. Calm down. Why get angry over something this trivial? In the end, you will monopolize the attention of everyone in the empire. Ornella blinked slightly. Attention? Don't you want me to become a daughter who makes you proud? Even prouder than any son? The most exalted woman in the empire. But do you think the people of the empire will really pay attention to me? Even if I became empress, wouldn't all the glory already have been stolen by the Grand Duke and Grand Duchess? Asev was silent for a moment before letting out a meaningful hum. Do you think your father would let matters end like this? You only need to keep doing what you've always done. Holding the crumpled letter between his fingers, he slowly moved it toward the flickering candle flame on the table. Your father will take care of the rest of this mess. A dark smile spread across his face, made all the more sinister by the wavering candlelight. Irene slowly stepped into the banquet hall, staring at the dense crowd before her. So many people, all gathered here to see me? Diego turned his head toward her and said, Today is the day you officially become Grand Duchess, my lady. Even I wouldn't want to miss such a special occasion. The hall was filled with guests, and Irene could feel eyes coming at her from all directions. Now that I've become Grand Duchess, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervousness inside her. I have to get used to all of this. Ornella walked steadily into the venue across the red carpet. The surrounding guests turned to look, and murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Good heavens, it's Her Highness the Princess. Duke Asev is here as well. Hearing that, Irene stopped in surprise. Arm in arm with Asev, Ornella approached with a smile. It's been so long, Irene. I missed you terribly. Have you been well all this time? Holding Asev's arm, Ornella introduced him. This is my father. Even though I insisted on coming alone, he's still worried. Asev laughed heartily in response. A father blessed with such a precious daughter is bound to worry. He bowed slightly. Iam Auzef von Paverini. I saw you from afar at the wedding, but this is the first time I've properly greeted you. Standing there, Irene looked a little stiff. The honor is mine. Looking at Ornella, Irene thought to herself, Ornella really has a good relationship with her father. Smiling at Irene, Ornella seemed to suddenly remember something. Oh, now that I think of it, Baron Elrod didn't come with you today? Irene lowered her eyes in silence, her expression faintly lonely. Ornella continued, on such a day worth celebrating, your only family wasn't able to attend. You must be very sad, Irene. In a low voice, Irene replied. No. She looked up, her gaze becoming firmer. Another member of my family promised to attend with me today. Ornella looked puzzled. Another family member? Asev, too, glanced at Irene in surprise. Measured footsteps approached from afar. Cesare walked down the red carpet, his deep voice resounding through the hall. My wife has finally arrived. Coming to Irene's side, Cesare naturally put an arm around her shoulders. Perhaps we should have left the residence together after all. Irene looked up at him and answered softly, no, you were very busy then. I'm already grateful that you came out to meet me like this. You always say such obvious things. Lowering his head slightly, he pressed a loving kiss to Irene's forehead. The guests around them stared at the scene in open surprise. Standing to one side, Asev looked rather awkward and gave a light cough. Your Grace. Then Asev laughed loudly. Congratulations. It's been a full 7 days, and I never knew your Grace had such a tender side. With an arm still around Irene's shoulders, Cesare turned his head and glanced at him. This? People often say that when a man goes mad for a woman, he might even sell his country. Lately, there have been rumors that I've gone mad in many ways. It seems Duke Pavarini notices things rather slowly. The smile on Asev's face stiffened. How can he say something like that so openly? Cesare replied, as if it were nothing. It's the truth. There's no need to mind it. In any case, I accept the Duke's congratulations. With Irene beside him, Cesare turned away. Under everyone's gaze, they slowly ascended the steps along the red carpet and walked deeper into the banquet hall. Turning his face slightly, Cesare looked at Asev with deep eyes and said, I'm certain that from now on, you will offer blessings for the future of my wife and me. The pen scratched across the fine parchment as Leon solemnly signed Irene's name on the official document. Irene Elrod Karl Elzat. With that, all procedures were complete. You are now officially the Grand Duchess. Irene held the document in both hands, her fingertips trembling slightly. The official Grand Duchess. How about a tune for the young Grand Duchess after so long? Leon said with a smile. Cesare, today is a very special day. At once, a graceful melody rose through the splendid hall. The notes leapt and echoed among the marble pillars. Seated at the piano, Cesare moved his long fingers skillfully over the keys, his figure cast across the sunlight-washed floor. Watching Cesari's back, Leon said to Irene, isn't he the perfect younger brother? Ever since childhood, there's never been anything Cesare could not do. Even I never expected him to command an instrument with such ease. Leon continued, when we were young, I was terribly jealous of him too. But later I realized even that jealousy was meaningless. Leon laced his fingers together, pressing lightly. Humans, in the end, cannot follow after gods. Seated in an ornate chair, he stared ahead with profound eyes, a meaningful curve rising at the corner of his lips. Irene Elrod, you naturally think the same, don't you?